The Iliad, Book 9. This is Your Mythology Book Club with Daniel Lucas Murphy.
Welcome to Your Mythology Book Club. I'm your host, Daniel. In this series, we're doing a very close reading of the Iliad, one book at a time. This is episode 9, and so we'll cover book 9. By listening to this entire podcast series, you will gain a more complete understanding and appreciation of the Iliad. As always, I'll be reading the text of the Iliad to you from the translation by Lang, Leaf, and Myers, interspersed with my own interpretations and those of various scholars whose works you will find referenced in the show notes. The Iliad comes to us from the depths of time. It was ancient to the ancients, who collected it from among even older stories and compiled it into the version we have. This means it's an artifact of literary culture that has been filtered through the minds of people from multiple time periods, each of which represent cultures far different from our own. Therefore, I'll go on tangents to explore some of the more confusing or intriguing historical, religious, and cultural points we'll come across. I'm not a professional scholar, but I am a very well-read amateur who has read various translations of the Iliad many, many times over the years. How I present the Iliad to you in this series is exactly how I read it each time, appreciating the language, enjoying the story, but also frequently pausing to ask, why? Why are the characters doing these strange things? What about their time in history, their culture or religion would make them want to have done what they just did? Over the years, I've taken my questions to the scholarly literature and have been able to gain more and more insight with each question I've researched. Throughout this series, I'll share these insights with you. Getting a handle on why the characters in the Iliad are doing some of the things they're doing will help us understand their motivations. Seeing their motivations in the light of their own time period, culture, and religion will allow us to discover the very human story that forms the heart of the Iliad. Before moving on to Book 9, let's recap Book 8, which set the stage for the significant movements forward we will see not only here in Book 9, but also over the course of the next several books, with the exception of Book 10, that's a fun diversion. Book 8 established conclusively that we had been in a long detour, starting in Book 3 and continuing through 7. Detour around what? Around the main plot of the Iliad, which, just to remind ourselves, is the Greeks suffering once Zeus grants Achilles' prayer for revenge upon Agamemnon for insulting him back in Book 1. The detour itself, the pause in the suffering of the Greeks, was due to Diomedes' perfect warrior status, keeping the Greeks in the fight that whole time. In Book 8, Zeus decided it was time to grant Achilles' prayer. Therefore, much of Book 8 was a low-key confrontation between Zeus and Diomedes, with Diomedes trying to keep the Greeks in the fight, and Zeus demonstrating to Diomedes and us that retreat was the only option, and therefore not dishonorable. Ultimately, Diomedes kept his honor while reluctantly retreating, and by the end of Book 8, the Greeks were penned into their walled camp. Hector was entirely too braggy about a victory that was handed to him by Zeus, and he led the Trojans as they camped out in the field, a blatant demonstration of just how unafraid they are now of the Greeks, who the Trojans want to keep an eye on during the night to make sure they can't get into their ships and escape back to Greece under the cover of night. The Trojans plan to burn them out in the morning, their wooden walls first, then their wooden ships. With the Greeks' backs against the sea and their defenses and ships vulnerable to fire, Greeks and Trojans both can foresee total destruction of the Greek forces in the morning and a quick resolution to this long festering war. As we enter Book 9, let's keep in mind the two secrets to which we as the audience are fully knowledgeable, but which not everyone in the story knows. Remembering these two secrets will be key to our recognizing just how much Book 9 will move the plot forward. Those characters within the story who don't know one or both secrets will be unaware just how momentous Book 9's events really are. I'll be referring to these secrets as Secret 1 and Secret 2. Secret 1 is that Achilles prayed to Zeus via his mother Thetis for suffering to be brought upon the Greeks, meaning the imminent doom faced by the Greeks right now was caused by Achilles himself. The other Greeks know that Achilles is angry with Agamemnon and that this is the reason he's sitting out of the war. But they have no idea that Achilles prayed to his mother, and that she brought this prayer to Zeus, much less that Zeus answered the prayer, and that this terrible setback they're facing, the threat of destruction at the hands of the Trojans this very morning, is all because Achilles asked for this to happen. The other Greeks simply believe that it's the absence of Achilles from battle which has caused this setback, and that's secret 1, which only Achilles among the mortals knows. Secret 2 is what we just learned in Book 8, which is that Zeus plans on answering Achilles' prayer with more than just suffering for the other Greeks. Secret 2 is that Zeus plans on bringing about Patroclus' death, and via the death of his most beloved comrade, Achilles' return to battle. Only the gods, and us, know Secret 2. Keep these 2 secrets in the back of your minds as we move forward into Book 9. Book 9 opens the very same night that the Greeks were chased and penned within their defenses, upon the Greeks within their camp, fearful and wondering how they can possibly escape destruction in the morning. Book 9. Thus kept the Trojans watch, but the Achaeans were holden of heaven-sent panic, handmaid of palsying fear, and all their best were stricken to the heart with grief intolerable. Like as 2 winds stir up the main, the home of fishes, even the north wind and the west wind that blow from Thrace, coming suddenly, and the dark billow straightway lifteth up its crest, and casteth much tangle out along the sea. Even so was the Achaean spirit troubled in their breast. But Atreides was stricken to the heart with sore grief, and went about bidding the clear-voiced heralds summon every man by name to the assembly, but not to shout aloud. And himself he toiled amid the foremost. So they sat sorrowful in assembly, and Agamemnon stood up weeping like unto a fountain of dark water, that from a beetling cliff poureth down its black stream. Even so, with deep groaning, he spake amid the Argives, and said, My friends, leaders and captains of the Argives, Zeus, son of Cronos, hath bound me with might in grievous blindness of soul. Hard of heart is he, for that erewhile he promised and gave his pledge that not till I had laid waste well-walled Ilios should I depart, but now hath planned a cruel wile, and biddeth me return in dishonor to Argos with the loss of many of my folk. Such, meseemeth, is the good pleasure of most mighty Zeus, that hath laid low the heads of many cities, yea, and shall lay low, for his is the highest power. So come, even as I shall bid, let us all obey. Let us flee with our ships to our dear native land, for now shall we never take wide-wayed Troy. While the campfires of the Trojans fill the plain, the Greeks are huddled within their defenses, and terror takes hold of them. Their fear and anxiety feels like the winter winds lashing the coast with seaweed. The heralds are sent around camp to gather the leaders. Not shouting, though, they are gathering quietly, not wanting the surrounding Trojans to know they're up to anything. Once all the leaders are gathered, that is, all the leaders minus Achilles, Agamemnon addresses them, weeping, his face like a rocky crag, the waterfall pouring forth and running down it. Agamemnon's speech is reminiscent of his testing of the Greeks in Book 2, when he wanted to see if they all had the resolve to fight. Then, as now, Agamemnon is recommending that they all flee the war. But this time, he's serious. This is no test. This sets the tone for Book 9. With the Trojans so confident they've remained in the field overnight rather than return within their own walled city as they'd always previously done, and the signs from the previous day's battle that Zeus has now very definitively turned on the Greeks, Agamemnon really does believe they're all about to be slaughtered in the morning. So said he, and they all held their peace and kept silence. Long time were the sons of the Achaeans voiceless for grief. But at the last, Diomedes of the loud war cry spake amid them, and said, Atreides, with thee first in thy folly will I contend, where it is just, O king, even in the assembly. Be not thou wroth therefore. My valor didst thou blame in chief amid the Danaans, and saidst that I was no man of war but a coward. And all this know the Argives both young and old. But the son of crooked counselling Cronos hath endowed thee but by halves. He granted thee to have the honor of the scepter above all men, but valor he gave thee not, wherein is highest power. Sir, deemest thou that the sons of the Achaeans are thus indeed cowards and weaklings, as thou sayest? If thine own heart be set on departing, go thy way. The way is before thee, and thy ships stand beside the sea, even the great multitude that followed thee from Mycenae. But all the other flowing-haired Achaeans will tarry here until we lay waste Troy. Nay, let them too flee on their ships to their dear native land, yet will we twain, even I and Sthenelus, fight till we attain the goal of Ilios, for in God's name are we come. So said he, and all the sons of the Achaeans shouted aloud, applauding the saying of horse-taming Diomedes. Diomedes, as he has so many times before, continues to be among the foremost of the Greeks in debate as well as in battle. Diomedes shows up Agamemnon as being more cowardly than the others, saying that even he, Agamemnon, were to abandon the war, the other Greeks would stay to continue the fight. Furthermore, even if everyone else were to leave, he, Diomedes, and Sthenelus alone would continue the fight, just the two of them. Diomedes' speech doesn't really move the debate forward at all. What it shows is contention among the ranks, open questioning of Agamemnon's leadership, and that Diomedes is still bitter about having been called cowardly after all he's done in battle. We as the audience know Diomedes is right. We're aware of Diomedes' role in keeping the Greeks in this fight throughout the duration of the digression or detour from the main plot of the Iliad, which was books 3 through 7. Then knightly Nestor arose and said amid them, Tydides, in battle art thou passing mighty, and in council art thou best among thine equals in years. None of all the Achaeans will make light of thy word nor gainsay it, but thou hast not made a full end of thy words. Moreover, thou art a young man indeed, and mightest even be my son, my youngest born. Yet thou counselleth prudently the princes of the Achaeans, because thou speakest according unto right. But lo, I that avow me to be older than thou will speak forth and expound everything. Neither shall any man despise my saying, not even the Lord Agamemnon. A tribeless, lawless, homeless man is he that loveth bitter civil strife. Howbeit now let us yield to black night, and make ready our meal, and let the sentinels bestow them severally along the deep-delved fosse without the wall. This charge give I to the young men, and thou, Atreides. Lead then the way, for thou art the most royal. Spread thou a feast for the counsellors. That is thy place, and seemly for thee. Thy huts are full of wine, that the ships of the Achaeans bring thee by day from Thrace across the wide sea. All entertainment is for thee, being king over many. In the gathering of many shalt thou listen to him that deviseth the most excellent counsel. Sore need have all the Achaeans of such as is good and prudent, because hard by the ships our foemen are burning their watchfires in multitude. What man can rejoice thereat? This night shall either destroy or save the host. So said he, and they gladly hearkened to him and obeyed. Nestor, of course, has to speak up and compliments Diomedes, but says that the leaders should gather to meet and feast. Nestor is being more diplomatic than Diomedes, and while Nestor is often somewhat ineffective and beside the point in debates, in this case, Nestor is right, and he's putting them all on the right track. A feast is just what they need to cool hot tempers, to distract from the feeling of imminent dread, and to gently move Agamemnon toward a decision which will be hard for him to make, but ultimately will be what the Greeks need to survive this night. So Nestor says to Agamemnon that, since his huts are filled with the wine that's brought daily to them from across the sea, his is a place for them all to meet. And once they have met, he says that Agamemnon will hear the ideas that all the leaders have to suggest, and he can choose what path forward seems best to him. Nestor is stepping up here, and the momentum in Book 9 is because of his initiative right now. Forth sallied the sentinels in their harness, around Thrasymedes, Nestor's son, shepherd of the host, and Ascalaphos and Almenos, sons of Ares, and Meriones, and Aphareus, and Deipyros, and Creon's son, noble Lycomedes. 7 were the captains of the sentinels, and with each went 50 young men, bearing their long spears in their hands. And they took post midway betwixt fosse and wall, and kindled a fire, and made ready each man his meal. Then Atrides gathered the counselors of the Achaeans, and led them to his hut, and spread before them an abundant feast. So they put forth their hands to the good cheer that lay before them. The sentries now man the wall, while the leaders have their feast. And among the captains of the sentries are a couple of important or important-ish names, including Nestor's less often seen son Thrasymedes, and poor Meriones, regulated to sentry duty, while presumably his buddy Idomeneus will get to feast. Always feasting, these guys. But at least they have the goal in mind of talking over their situation, their dire situation, once the feasting is over. Now remember, Achilles isn't here feasting with the other leaders. He's been hanging out in his own huts with his own people ever since his falling out with Agamemnon. Whatever the Greek leaders discuss after their feast, the message will have to be sent to Achilles. And when they had put away from them the desire of meat and drink, then the old man first began to weave his counsel, even Nestor, whose rede of old time was approved the best. He of good intent spake to them, and said, Most noble son of Atreus, Agamemnon, king of men, with thy name will I begin, and with thy name end, because thou art king over many hosts, and to thy hand Zeus hath entrusted scepter and law, that thou mayest take counsel for thy folk. Thee, therefore, more than any it behoveth both to speak and hearken, and to accomplish what another than thou may say, when his heart biddeth him speak for profit. Wheresoever thou leadest all shall turn on thee. So I will speak as meseemeth best. No other man shall have a more excellent thought than this that I bear in mind from old time even until now. Since the day when thou, O heaven-sprung king, didst go and take the damsel Briseis from angry Achilles' hut by no consent of ours. Nay, I right heartily dissuaded thee, but thou yieldest to thy proud spirit, and dishonorest a man of valor whom even the immortals honored, for thou didst take and keepest from him his meed of valor. Still, let us even now take thought how we may appease him, and persuade him with gifts of friendship and kindly words. After the leaders have eaten, Nestor again speaks, and he starts off a little hesitantly, throwing some compliments towards Agamemnon. This is an intentional rhetorical technique, because he knows he's going to have to move next toward the blame that Agamemnon bears for their dire situation. It was Agamemnon, after all, who took Briseis away from Achilles, and that's what enraged their greatest warrior so much that he stopped fighting. This is perfectly true, but it won't be easy for Agamemnon to hear without getting defensive. Nestor does eventually get around to saying it once he's buttered Agamemnon up enough. They need to get Achilles back into the action. The threat facing the Greeks is almost certain destruction at the hands of the Trojans in the morning, and the obvious solution is the return of Achilles to battle. No one doubts that Achilles could save them. He alone could make that much of a difference, and so the stakes couldn't be any higher in persuading Agamemnon to try mending his relationship with Achilles. In conclusion, Nestor says, let's figure out how we can placate Achilles. And there's only two things that will work. Two things that Agamemnon can offer Achilles. Stuff and an apology. Notice that Nestor recommends that Agamemnon offer Achilles both gifts of friendship and kindly words. The gifts, yes, we can maybe hope for Agamemnon to do that. But kindly words? That's going to be hard for Agamemnon. He's a very, very prideful king, insecure and prideful. And Agamemnon, king of men, answered him and said, Old sir, in no false wise hast thou accused my folly. Fool was I myself deny it not. Worth many hosts is he whom Zeus loveth in his heart, even as now he honoureth this man, and destroyeth the host of the Achaeans. But seeing I was a fool in that I yielded to my sorry passion, I will make amends, and give a recompense beyond telling. In the midst of you all will I name the excellent gifts, 7 tripods untouched of fire, and 10 talents of gold, and 20 gleaming cauldrons, and 12 stalwart horses, winners in the race, that have taken prizes by their speed. No lackland were that man, neither unpossessed of precious gold, whose substance were as great as the prizes my whole hooved steeds have borne me off. And 7 women will I give, skilled in excellent handiwork, lesbians, whom I chose me from the spoils, the day that he himself took stablished Lesbos, surpassing womankind in beauty. These will I give him, and with them shall be she whom I erst took from him, even the daughter of Briseis. Moreover, I will swear a great oath, that never I went up into her bed, nor had with her converse, as is the wont of mankind, even of men and women. All these things shall be set straightway before him. And if hereafter the gods grant us to lay waste the great city of Priam, then let him enter in when we Achaeans be dividing the spoil, and laid his ship full of gold and bronze, and himself choose 20 Trojan women, the fairest that there be after Helen of Argos. And if we win to the richest of lands, even Achaean Argos, he shall be my son, and I will hold him in honor likewise with Orestes, my stripling boy, that is nurtured in all abundance. 3 daughters are mine in my well-builded hall, Chrysothemis, and Laodice, and Iphianassa. Let him take of them which he will, without gifts of wooing, to Peleus' house, and I will add a great dower, such as no man ever yet gave with his daughter. And 7 well-peopled cities will I give him, Cardamyle, and Enope, and grassy Hyre, and holy Phere, and Anthia deep in meads, and fair Ipaea, and Pedassos, land of vines. And all are nigh to the salt sea, on the uttermost border of sandy Pylos. Therein dwell men abounding in flocks and kine, men that shall worship him like a god with gifts, and beneath his sway fulfill his prosperous ordinances. All this will I accomplish, so he but cease from wrath. Let him yield. Hades, I ween, is not to be softened, neither overcome, and therefore he is hatefulest of all gods to mortals. Yea, let him be ruled by me, inasmuch as I am more royal, and avow me to be the elder in years. Agamemnon's reaction is surprising. Agamemnon agrees with Nestor's statement that it was Agamemnon's own action, way back at the beginning of the Iliad, taking Briseis away from Achilles, that got them all into this mess. No pushback at all on his bearing the brunt of the blame. Wow! Agamemnon makes a big public speech announcing all the things he'll give Achilles, including returning Briseis herself, and he notes that he hasn't slept with her. Agamemnon announces more stuff and land that he'll give Achilles once they're back in Greece, and proposes that they all let Achilles get a lot of the upcoming loot once they take Troy together with his help. This offering that Agamemnon is publicly proposing to send to Achilles is a lot, really a lot of stuff, meaning a lot of honor coming Achilles' way. But wait, that's not all, because in addition to tons of treasure and land, which incidentally includes cities that it's not really clear would have actually been within Agamemnon's kingdom, Agamemnon is offering one of his own daughters for Achilles to marry. As in, I'll make Achilles my son-in-law. I'm inviting him into my family. This is also part of the very public offer Agamemnon is making to Achilles. Achilles can even choose which of his daughters he'd like to marry. This brings up an interesting digression about the daughters of Agamemnon and the history that Achilles already has with one of them. Agamemnon here names his various daughters, any of whom he's offering for Achilles to choose to marry: Chrysothemis, Laodice, and Iphianassa. It's this last daughter, Iphianassa, that I'd like to draw your attention to. Her name is very similar to another daughter of Agamemnon, who's mentioned in some of the stories surrounding the Iliad, Iphigenia. Iphianassa and Iphigenia. Beyond their names, both starting with the same root word iphi, meaning by force, the second portion of each of their names both refer to kingship, 2 different words for king, according to an article by Gregory Nagy titled simply Iphigenia and Iphianassa. Let's go on a little digression together into the confusion surrounding these 2 daughters of Agamemnon, because it's particularly relevant given the surprisingly grim history that exists between Agamemnon and Achilles, and the previous time when Agamemnon talked about marrying one of his daughters off to Achilles. From antiquity, there has been some confusion as to whether these two daughters, Iphigenia and Iphianassa, may in fact be the same person, or if they are indeed two different women. Here's why this question matters. Iphigenia specifically plays a part before the Greeks leave Greece on their way to Troy. The Greek leaders had all gathered with their armies and their ships at the mainland Greek port town of Aulis, but there was no wind. They wouldn't be able to reach Troy without wind. And the seer Calchas, remember him from the opening of the Iliad? In Book 1, you may have noticed that Agamemnon clearly had some pre-existing beef with Calchas, saying that Calchas never has any good news, always predicting trouble, that rotten seer. It seemed kind of out of place at the time, but not if you know what happened at Aulis, because at Aulis, Calchas was the seer who understood that it was the goddess Artemis who was angered then, like he knew it was Apollo who was angered at the beginning of the Iliad. There at Aulis, with the fleet stuck without any wind, it was Calchas who had told them all it was Agamemnon's fault there was no wind. Why? Because Agamemnon had offended Artemis by killing an animal sacred to her. As in the opening of the Iliad, at Aulis, Calchas also had the uncomfortable duty of informing Agamemnon, in front of everyone, that the High King specifically was the reason their expedition was going to fail. The only way Artemis would let them have any wind to sail out of Aulis was if Agamemnon would sacrifice his daughter, Iphigenia. Wow, that's a really heavy ask for a father. Could Agamemnon do such a thing? Could he? Oh yes, he could, and did. But it's even worse than that once you hear how he did it. To deceive his own daughter and her mother to escort Iphigenia to the altar, Agamemnon came up with a story, a lie, to lure his own daughter to her death. He said that she was being given in marriage to Achilles. Achilles, the dashing hero, who, by the way, had no part in the lie and was plenty pissed at Agamemnon afterwards for being used in this evil way. Iphigenia showed up, expecting a wedding, and instead was killed, sacrificed on the altar like an animal. Artemis was satisfied, her anger assuaged, and the winds blew, and the ships sailed to Troy. Later on, in stories set after the Iliad, we learn that maybe Artemis didn't let Iphigenia die after all, that she was replaced at the last moment by a deer, and Iphigenia herself was spirited away to a far-off temple of Artemis in Asia Minor, where she became a priestess. But all this is to say, wait a minute, does the story of the sacrifice at Aulis fit into the Iliad, or was it shoehorned in afterward? If the story of the sacrifice at Aulis was a later addition, and the Iliad predates that, then what's up with the beef that Agamemnon already has with Calchas at the beginning of the Iliad? Are Iphigenia and Iphianassa the same person? Their names mean the same thing. Why would anyone name two daughters essentially the same thing? It would be like naming one daughter Madison ending in S-O-N and another Madison ending in S-E-N. Why? Why would you do that? If you accept the events at Aulis as a prelude to the Iliad, then the beef Agamemnon has with Calchas makes sense. But Aulis makes it difficult to imagine Achilles being on board with marrying one of Agamemnon's daughters, since he'd already been used as a pawn to lure another daughter to her death. It's hard to say how these texts fit together, but it's an interesting little hanging loose end, and one the audience of the Iliad would have known about and pondered. And among those thoughts the audience would have had is, hey, wait a minute, is Agamemnon now really offering to Achilles one of his daughters after he lured another of his daughters to her death with a false promise of marriage to Achilles? Finally, note how Agamemnon ends his speech, in which he ostensibly is making public to the other Greek leaders what he's offering to Achilles to make amends for his own transgression, his own angering of their best warrior, and the only person who could save them in the morning from what they all believe is certain and very, very imminent doom. He said, "Yea, let him be ruled by me. inasmuch as I am more royal, and avow me to be the elder in years." This does not sound at all to me like someone who is contrite, who is apologizing. Nestor had recommended that Agamemnon offer both gifts and words to soothe Achilles. Even in the moment of accepting Nestor's suggestion for gifts, Agamemnon still didn't get it. His response to Nestor was for Achilles to yield place to me. Agamemnon can bring himself to offer gifts. In a culture where stuff equals honor, Agamemnon can part with gifts and therefore send some of his own honor to Achilles. He's capable of that. But Agamemnon just cannot bring himself to offer the words of apology that Nestor has suggested. And so, before it's even begun, we have to ask ourselves, will this work? Will this offer of reconciliation from Agamemnon to Achilles be successful? The stakes couldn't be any higher, and there's already a cloud of doubt hanging over this mission. Then knightly Nestor of Gerenia answered and said, "Most noble son of Atreus, Agamemnon, king of men, now are these gifts not lightly to be esteemed, that thou offerest King Achilles. Come, therefore, let us speed forth picked men to go with all haste to the hut of Peleus' son Achilles. Lo now, whomsoever I appoint, let them consent. First, let Phoenix, dear to Zeus, lead the way, and after him great Aias and noble Odysseus. And for heralds, let Odios and Eurybates be their companions. And now bring water for our hands, and bid keep holy silence, that we may pray unto Zeus the son of Cronos, if perchance he will have mercy upon us." So said he, and spake words that were well-pleasing unto all. Now that Agamemnon has made this public offer of cash and prizes to Achilles for the wrong he committed, Nestor agrees that Agamemnon's offer should be sufficient. Nestor suggests the men to bring the message to Achilles: Aias the Greater, Odysseus, and Phoenix. Phoenix is an old man who is dear to Achilles, who served as a kind of tutor for him in his youth, and is the closest thing Achilles has to a father here in Troy, as his biological father, Peleus, is back home in Greece now, much too old to have joined this war. The introduction of Phoenix at this point has seemed somewhat odd to readers and scholars over the years. For someone this important to Achilles to only now be mentioned is strange. And we can postulate that perhaps this character represents a later level of development, although I wouldn't say that Phoenix being a later addition is a foregone conclusion. It is a bit convenient that, among all the rest of Achilles' retinue who are described as remaining with Achilles, Phoenix happened to be out for a stroll on the very night the other Greeks needed someone from Achilles' inner circle to join this embassy, or else Phoenix alone hadn't remained with Achilles. Neither explanation of Phoenix's inclusion in the embassy bears close scrutiny. What can't be questioned, however, is the importance of Phoenix's role here in Book 9. Be on the lookout for his speech to Achilles later on, which has been called the jewel in the crown of Book 9. Forthwith the heralds poured water on their hands, and the young men crowned the bowls with drink, and gave each man his portion after they had poured the libation in the cups. And when they had made libation and drunk as their heart desired, they issued forth from the hut of Agamemnon son of Atreus. And knightly Nestor of Gerenia gave them full charge, with many a glance to each, and chiefest to Odysseus, how they should essay to prevail on Peleus' noble son. So the twain went along the shore of the loud-sounding sea, making instant prayer to the earth embracer, the shaker of the earth, that they might with ease prevail on Aeacides' great heart. We are now entering another episode of the Iliad which has its own scholarly name, the Embassy. Odysseus and Aias, in addition to Phoenix, these are the men of the embassy, those men handpicked by Nestor to go and make this offer to Achilles, to placate his anger and hopefully get him to rejoin the war, now that Agamemnon has admitted his fault and is willing to give him back not only Briseis, but tons of other stuff as well. And in a culture where loot equals honor, Agamemnon is offering a lot of honor. Also honoring Achilles is the fact that this offer is being made by two of the leading men of the Greeks, two of the men who Achilles was closest with prior to his fight with Agamemnon, along with someone he loves and respects from his homeland. Each of these three men, Odysseus, Aias, and Phoenix, will bring something unique to the table. Nestor gives them all advice, individually, on how to persuade Achilles, but especially to Odysseus, whose cunning and way with words should be key in making the embassy a success. Book 9 is a strange beast, both in terms of its role in the story of the Iliad and in its tone. Its role in the story is central. The wrath of Achilles and his removal from the war has now resulted in the imminent doom of the Greeks at the hands of the Trojans this very coming morning, giving 9 this fatal tone. There's a ticking clock. Not that clocks had been invented yet, but you know what I mean. We feel an urgency when we read Book 9. Achilles will either relent or the Greeks will all die. And yet, there's a disconnection between how we feel when we read 9 and how the characters are often seeming to feel. Everyone's spending all this time talking. They already had a feast and then a wordy debate. But I gotta tell you, we're only getting started with the talking. We've got a ways to go. It's important talk. It's the kind of reflection upon the situation that readers always need to see story characters go through. This discussion about what all the preceding events have meant and how the characters plan on acting going forward. But it's as if all the reflection, which could have been interspersed between Book 1 and now, every last bit of it is jammed here into 9. And that detracts from the tone, from the urgency. We have to remind ourselves that the Trojans are camped out in the field. Otherwise, we as readers could easily fall into the same complacency that the characters seem to feel. However, the action is coming. It's on the way. And in the meantime, 9 is our opportunity to talk along with the characters. We're all going to do a lot of reflecting in this episode. We will talk about what the preceding events have meant and what we can expect going forward, just as the characters are doing. We will take advantage of the opportunity that Book 9's misplaced, relaxed atmosphere offers to get our bearings in terms of the overall story and to explore some interesting digressions. And here's the next of these interesting digressions. You might have noticed that Homer only mentions 2 members of the embassy leaving the meeting of the Greek leaders. In our translation by Lang, Leaf, and Myers, saying of the members of the embassy, "So the twain went along the shore of the loud-sounding sea." In Lattimore's translation, this line reads, "So these 2 walked along the strand of the sea, deep thundering." Klein is more clear in who he's referencing, saying, "So Ajax and Odysseus walked beside the echoing sea." Referring here to 2 members of the embassy, when we'd just been introduced to 3, may not be just a little typo, one of those famous Homeric nods, when the bard is said to have fallen asleep and lost track of a minor detail. Was there a single author of the Iliad? Or was the Iliad composed by multiple contributors over a period of time? For those who strongly support the idea that the Iliad was written by a single person, this line is very problematic, pointing to an earlier version of the embassy episode that may have only included Aias and Odysseus. This suggests a later introduction of the Phoenix character, and therefore strongly implies that the Iliad had multiple authors over a period of time. So those who want to believe that the Iliad was written by one person at one time must downplay the appearance of only 2 members of the embassy in this line here. Now, conversely, for those who champion a multiple author theory of the Iliad, this is one of their best clues to the Iliad having been added to by a later contributor. So this little word translated here as the number 2 in English is actually the battleground upon which a fierce debate about the authorship of the Iliad has been fought. And here's why. An aspect of the Greek language the original Iliad was written in is that it had a specific way of wording when there was exactly 2 of a thing. We don't have this in English. In English, the only numbers that affect how we speak are 1 or more than 1. So for instance, we would say he walked if we're talking about a single person, or they walked if we're talking about an indeterminate number of 2 or more people. But Greek had a way of indicating through speech when it was specifically 2 who were doing something. So they could imply through other parts of speech that it was exactly 2 persons or things being discussed. So the word we're seeing translated here into English in various ways to imply 2 men, Aias and Odysseus, in the original Greek was vague as to which 2 men, but very clear that it was specifically 2 men, only 2 men who were being referred to. So for those who believe the Iliad was written over time by multiple authors, this Only 2 said here is put forth as a reference to an earlier version, a sort of a leftover from that earlier version in which only Odysseus and Aias took part in the embassy. And that's the argument for those who believe the embassy originally only consisted of Odysseus and Aias, with then, therefore, Phoenix being a later addition. Now, other people feel that Phoenix is so central to Book 9, and as you'll see, Book 9 is so central to the Iliad overall, that they simply cannot believe the embassy episode could have ever existed without Phoenix. Those who hold this position may reject entirely the idea that the Iliad had multiple authors. Now, Homer didn't provide us with any working notes. As an author, he's a stubbornly closed book, and all we have of him is the text. Author Agatha Thornton has an intriguing solution to this linguistic problem in her paper, once again, The Duels, in Book 9 of the Iliad. And that's duels as in 2 things, not duels as in a one-on-one fight. Thornton suggests that the duel, in the verbiage at this point in the Iliad, could be referencing 2 groups within the embassy, which would consist of Phoenix on the one hand, as the leader designated by Nestor, and Odysseus and Aias together on the other hand as a group. And Thornton provides examples of other instances within the Iliad when this dual aspect of the ancient Greek language was used to indicate a single person or thing on one hand and a group on the other hand. So if Thornton is right, then this whole scholarly debate about the single versus multiple authorship of the Iliad may have to move on to some other battleground. So, who was this Phoenix? And if he's so important to Achilles, why are we only now finding out about him so late in the Iliad? Phoenix himself will give a detailed autobiography shortly, but here's an abbreviated version so you know a little about why he's so important to Achilles. Phoenix was an exile, taken in by Achilles' father Peleus. Phoenix had been cursed with childlessness by his own father. Finding himself welcomed into the home of Peleus and his remarkable young son Achilles, Phoenix loved Achilles like a son, becoming a second father to him. And because Peleus was too old at the start of the Trojan War to join the expedition, Phoenix went along to continue Achilles' education, to be his support, and during all these years of war, Phoenix has been the closest thing to an actual father that Achilles has had with him. Phoenix joined the embassy in the hope that he could convince Achilles from an emotional point of view to give up his anger and save the Greeks now in their desperate last moment before dawn and the massed attack of the Trojans. As for why we're only now learning about Phoenix, this may simply be due to a lack of exposure to Achilles and his inner circle up to this point in the Iliad. Agatha Thornton points out that we've been shown similarly little of Patroclus, with a brief mention of him early on in the Iliad, and then not another mention of him until Book 8, when we learned of Zeus's plan to see him dead as a way to lure Achilles back into the action. Like Patroclus, Phoenix will continue to show up in further books of the Iliad, appearing later in books 16, 19, and 23. Furthermore, Phoenix is referenced in Book 17, and Athene appears in his form in Book 17. These characters from Achilles' retinue, who we're only seeing now that Achilles is being brought back into the story, were all likely known to ancient audiences from other epics which have since been lost. It would be like a character from a previous season of a television show returning. Confusing to those of us who hadn't seen any previous seasons, but an exciting return of a familiar face to those who had been watching from the beginning. As the men of the embassy walk toward Achilles' camp, or rather just the 2 of them, or maybe the 2 men of one group and the one of another group, however you want to interpret that one problematic line, they are praying to Poseidon, the earth shaker. Why Poseidon? I'm honestly not sure, but I have a couple conjectures. For one, they're walking along the beach, right next to Poseidon's realm, the sea. But even more than that, I always think of the beach in ancient times as not at all the peaceful place for vacations and relaxing sunny days we think of it as being today. The beach in ancient times was the place of risky departures and dubious arrivals, of your own warriors going off to maybe never come home, or foreign warriors come to bring destruction and enslavement. Storms, wrecks, floods, these too came from the beach, or at least the sea of which the beach was the liminal space. The beach was a place of uncertainty, ground underfoot sometimes, then beneath the waves once the tide comes in. Poseidon, the god of those crashing, booming waves striking the shore along which the men of the embassy are now walking, were only one manifestation of his shaking, destructive power, for he was also the god of earthquakes. Finally, this desperate plan of theirs, the embassy's mission to convince Achilles to help save them from destruction in the morning, this plan was thought up by Nestor, whose grandfather was Poseidon himself. Could this be another reason why Poseidon is on their minds at this moment? The men of the embassy must be thinking about all of this. What they're not thinking about, because the gods did not make them privy to this information, is that their divine ally Poseidon is a bit upset at the Greeks right now, specifically because of the actions of his own grandson Nestor, who not long ago encouraged the Greeks to build those defenses, without having offered proper due to the god whose role it is to cause earthquakes and topple the works of men. No, the men are praying to Poseidon in earnest right now, in desperate earnest. Would Poseidon help them avoid destruction at the hands of the surrounding Trojans in the morning? Would Poseidon convince Achilles to reconsider if they fail? It's worth a few muttered prayers. Why not ask? So they came to the huts and ships of the Myrmidons, and found their king taking his pleasure of a loud lyre, fair, of curious work, with a silver crossbar upon it, one that he had taken from the spoils when he laid Eetion's city waste. Therein he was delighting his soul, and sang of the glories of heroes. And over against him sat Patroclus, alone in silence, watching till Aeacides should cease from singing. The embassy reaches Achilles' huts, through the dark and the crashing waves, and their own doubts and fears, and find a scene they surely had not been expecting, one whose domestic and tranquil tone is entirely at odds with their own worried emotional states. Achilles, reclined within his tent, and across from him is Patroclus. Achilles is playing a silver lyre and singing a song while Patroclus listens. This particular lyre he's playing is from the lute he'd gotten earlier in the war, when he'd taken the city of Eetion, the father of Hector's wife Andromache. Once the men of the embassy adjust their minds to this unexpected discovery, they realize Achilles is singing a song about the glory of heroes. This is an insight into what's been on his mind since any of us last saw him way back in Book 1. And the glory of heroes has not just been in the back of his mind, it's very much what Achilles has been actively thinking about, and will inform everything he has to say to us during Book 9. A song about the glory of war, sung by one hero upon the very instrument he acquired from a household associated with that of his greatest rival. This is also fitting. Achilles separated himself from the Greek society when he walked away from participation in the war back in Book 1. He's been alone and surely ruminating on the events of Book 1, in which his glory was diminished by Agamemnon, by way of Agamemnon taking Briseis away from him. Achilles is being obedient to Athene's instructions to him, and stifling his anger, as Athene had instructed him to refrain from killing Agamemnon, in return for which Athene promised he would receive 3 and 4 times the value of the treasure Agamemnon took from him. And while it's unpleasant for us to think of Briseis as having an economic value as an asset, that's what his initial anger was about. And to himself and to the men of the embassy and their society as a whole, his anger is understandable. And as Athene promised, he is about to be offered treasure far beyond the value that Briseis represented. Everything about Book 9 so far makes sense to all involved, to Achilles and Patroclus, and to the men of the embassy who are bringing Agamemnon's offer of treasure. This was promised by Athene. Achilles expected this embassy to come along at some point, and he probably has at least some general sense of how much they will offer him. This is all part of what Achilles has been brooding about ever since we last saw him. As we think about the imminent threat of destruction the Greeks face, it might be tempting to dismiss Achilles' resistance to their persuasion as being selfish, and to not pay as much attention as we should to Achilles' perspectives on the matter. It's hard for us to sympathize with the argument when it's framed as simply being that of two men, Agamemnon and Achilles, disputing which of them owns the woman Briseis, even emphasizing that their culture was one in which the honor of warriors was the most important social capital, and that they measured honor in terms of everything the warrior gained from their prowess in battle, only helps us a little in seeing how important and intractable this conflict really was. Author James Ariti, in his article Achilles' Alienation in Iliad 9, analyzes this situation in light of the borderland that Achilles finds himself in right now. The line between the simple and understandable separation between him and the other Greeks, which this embassy seeks to address, and the potential for full alienation from Greek society. Because that's a real threat here in Book 9, for Achilles to progress from merely separated to fully alienated. Ariti reminds us that this dispute between Agamemnon and Achilles started when Achilles tried to remedy the plague which Agamemnon caused by his improper treatment of Apollos' priest Chryses. Achilles' socially appropriate public addressing of Agamemnon in the forum of leaders resulted in Agamemnon singling Achilles out for his selfishly restoring of his own lost honor when he had to return Chryses' daughter to him, and none of the other Greek leaders really did anything to heal that wrong, which they could have tried to do through that same public forum of leaders. Thus, the separation of Achilles not just from Agamemnon, but from the whole of the Greek society. Now that this rift threatens all of them, the other Greek leaders have finally stepped forward, at the insistence of Nestor, to take up their responsibility in healing this rift. While the men of the embassy are hoping to lure Achilles back into their society and mend the separation, what really has Achilles been meditating upon ever since Book 1? Will treasure really draw him back in? Or have Achilles' meditations gone beyond thoughts of simple treasure and glory? As Ariti points out, if the Iliad were merely the story of a man who lost his temper over a girl, or even over a sense of honor involving a military prize, it would never have attained the dimensions of greatness that mankind has granted it. Ariti discusses the absence of any moral language or values in the society of the time for Achilles to frame his feelings within. In this regard, Achilles is an explorer, but of the moral realm. This is what Achilles has been up to since we last saw him, brooding, yes, but more specifically, groping toward a deeper sense of right and wrong, without the millennia of philosophical and theological thought that we have to draw upon. This reaching for something more, this blind exploration of the moral frontier in front of him, gives Achilles a universal appeal as a complex protagonist on a trajectory toward further growth. I'll make further references to Ariti's work throughout this episode. It will be very helpful to us in contextualizing the real danger here. The embassy could bring Achilles back in, yes, and they know they need to, with the Trojans surrounding them and ready to burn the camp and the ships in the morning. But the embassy could also push Achilles away and make the morning's fatal outcome a foregone conclusion. The embassy episode, which forms the heart of Book 9, begins properly now, with the speech of Odysseus. After Odysseus, Phoenix will speak, and finally Aias. Achilles will respond to each of these three speeches. Odysseus' speech is the second longest of the embassy, and contains subtleties which we will explore once we've heard from him. Phoenix's speech is by far the longest of the three, and ultimately the most effective. Aias' speech, as one might expect from his character, is blunt but powerful. Achilles' response to each of the three speeches will give us a measure of his changing mind as this evening goes on. So said he, and Patroclus hearkened to his dear comrade. He cast down a great fleshing block in the firelight, and laid thereon a sheep's back and a fat goat's, and a great hog's kine rich with fat, and Automedon held them for him, while Achilles carved. Then he sliced well the meat, and pierced it through with spits, and Menoetios' son, that godlike hero, made the fire burn high. Then when the fire was burned down, and the flame waned, he scattered the embers, and laid the spits thereover, resting them on the spit racks, when he had sprinkled them with holy salt. Then, when he had roasted the meat, and apportioned it in the platters, Patroclus took bread, and dealt it forth on the table in fair baskets, and Achilles dealt the meat. And he sate them over against godlike Odysseus by the other wall, and bade his comrade Patroclus do sacrifice to the gods. So he cast the first fruits into the fire. Then put they forth their hands to the good cheer lying before them. And when they had put from them the desire of meat and drink, Aias nodded to Phoenix. But noble Odysseus marked it, and filled a cup with wine, and pledged Achilles. Upon seeing the men of the embassy, Achilles and Patroclus suddenly stand up, surprised to see their visitors after being so long alone, separated from the wider Greek society. Achilles welcomes them and says they're dear to him despite his wrath. Remember that? The wrath of Achilles that this story is all about. With lots of additions and battle sequences and back and forth, it really is all about Achilles, his wrath, and the arc of his emotional growth, which will culminate in Book 24. So far, nothing has come forward which could bend that intense wrath into an arc. However, let's keep an eye out for something which might give Achilles pause, now that we're finally about to see our protagonist once more after so long. But surprisingly enough, no wrath from Achilles right now. In fact, the men of the embassy have stumbled upon this lovely domestic scene where Achilles and Patroclus prepare a meal for their guests. It was important to respect the rules of hospitality, which required that guests be welcomed with food and drink, and only after the meal would the host ask any questions about why a visitor has come. So they roast goat meat and pork, and they have bread and wine. After all have eaten, Odysseus sees Aias nod. Then that's the sign to begin his persuasion of Achilles. Now begins the first of the 3 speeches of the embassy, that of Odysseus. Hail, O Achilles! The fair feast lack we not either in the hut of Agamemnon son of Atreus, neither now in thine. For feasting is there abundance to our heart's desire. But our thought is not for matters of the delicious feast. Nay, we behold very sore destruction, thou fosterling of Zeus, and are afraid. Now it is in doubt whether we save the benched ships, or behold them perish, if thou put not on thy might. Nigh unto ships and wall have the high-hearted Trojans and famed allies pitched their camp, and kindled many fires throughout their host, and ween that they shall no more be withheld, but will fall on our black ships. And Zeus, son of Cronos, showeth them signs upon the right by lightning, and Hector greatly exulteth in his might, and rageth furiously, trusting in Zeus, and recketh not of God nor man, for mighty madness hath possessed him. He prayeth bright dawn to shine forth with all speed, for he hath passed his word to smite off from the ships the ensigns' tops, and to fire the hulls with devouring flame, and hard thereby to make havoc of the Achaeans, confounded by the smoke. Therefore I am sore afraid in my heart, lest the gods fulfill his boastings, and it be fated for us to perish here in Troyland, far from Argos, pasture land of horses. Up then, if thou art minded even at the last to save the failing sons of the Achaeans from the war din of the Trojans. Thyself shalt have grief hereafter, and when the ill is done, is there no way to find a cure therefore? In good time, rather, take thou thought to ward the evil day from the Danaans. Friend, surely to thee thy father Peleus gave commandment the day he sent thee to Agamemnon forth from Phthia. My son, strength shall Athenian Hera give thee if they will. But do thou refrain thy proud soul in thy breast, for gentle-mindedness is the better part, and withdraw from mischievous strife, that so the Argives may honor thee the more, both young and old. Thus the old man charged thee, but thou forgettest. Yet cease now at the last, and eschew thy grievous wrath. Agamemnon offereth thee worthy gifts, so thou wilt cease from anger. Lo now, hearken thou to me, and I will tell thee all the gifts that in his hut Agamemnon promised thee. 7 tripods untouched of fire, and 10 talents of gold, and 20 gleaming cauldrons, and 12 stalwart horses, winners in the race, that have taken prizes by their speed. No lackland were that man, neither unpossessed of precious gold, whose substance were as great as the prizes Agamemnon's steeds have borne him off. And 7 women will he give, skilled in excellent handiwork, lesbians whom he chose him from the spoil, the day that thou thyself tookest Lesbos, surpassing womankind in beauty. These will he give thee, and with them shall she be whom erst he took from thee, even the daughter of Briseis. Moreover, he will swear a great oath, that never he went up into her bed, nor had with her converse, as is the wont of mankind, O king, even of men and women. All these things shall be set straightway before thee, and if hereafter the gods grant us to lay waste the great city of Priam, then enter thou in when we Achaeans be dividing the spoil, and lade thy ship full of gold and bronze, and thyself choose 20 Trojan women, the fairest that there be after Helen of Argos. And if we win to the richest of lands, even Achaean Argos, thou shalt be his son, and he will hold thee in like honor with Orestes, his stripling boy that is nurtured in all abundance. 3 daughters are in his well-builded hall, Chrysothemis and Laodice and Iphianassa. Take thou of them which thou wilt, without gifts of wooing, to Peleus' house, and he will add a great dower, such as no man ever yet gave with his daughter. And 7 well-peopled cities will he give thee, Cardamyle, and Enope, and Gracihyre, and holy Pharai, and Anthea, deep in meads, and fair Ipaea, and Pedassos, land of vines. And all are nigh to the sea, on the uttermost border of sandy Pylos. Therein dwell men abounding in flocks and kine, men that shall worship thee like a god with gifts, and beneath thy sway fulfill thy prosperous ordinances. All this will he accomplish, so thou but cease from wrath. But, and if Agamemnon be too hateful to thy heart, both he and his gifts, yet have thou pity on all the Achaeans that faint throughout the host. These shall honor thee as a god, for verily thou wilt earn exceeding great glory at their hands. Yea, now mightest thou slay Hector, for he would come very near thee in his deadly madness, because he deemeth that there is no man like unto him among the Danaans that the ships brought hither. Odysseus' speech was the first of the 3 embassy speeches, each of which will make different appeals to Achilles. Odysseus' speech conveys Agamemnon's actual offer to Achilles, and so appropriately, this speech is focused on glory and loot, and the glory Achilles will accrue with all the loot Agamemnon is offering him. Odysseus tells Achilles that the Trojans are camped in the field, no longer keeping within their walls, no longer afraid of the Greeks. The Trojans have received good omens, and Hector has been rampaging. Odysseus himself feels it's a toss-up whether they'll be able to save the ships come morning, or if the ships will be burned and all the Greeks killed, here, far away from home. There's a great deal of subtlety to Odysseus' speech, despite the simple offer of loot, and the simple update on the dire news since Achilles stepped away from the war. Moving beyond the news, Odysseus recalls to Achilles the day when Achilles was recruited for this war. Odysseus was there that day and spoke with Peleus, Achilles' father. Odysseus reminds Achilles of what his father told him on that long ago day, that he'll be given strength by the gods, Hera and Athene, if they will it, but that he must contain his pride. Now, each of the 3 speeches in Book 9 will make some reference to Achilles' pride or wrath needing to be restrained. Odysseus knows there's still time for Achilles to save them, and only after all of this, the dire straits they're in, and the reminder to Achilles of his own father's advice, does Odysseus move on to the actual offer of Agamemnon, a list of all the treasure that Agamemnon is willing to give him. A great deal of Odysseus' speech is a relaying of Agamemnon's message to Achilles, but there's nothing simple about how Odysseus relays the message. In content, it is largely what Agamemnon had to say, but in tone and persuasiveness, it's far more cunning, as we'd expect from Odysseus of many wiles. Recall how messages are usually given in the Iliad, which is verbatim. It's actually one of the pet peeves that people report about reading the Iliad. All those repeated phrases like, and the armor clanged upon him, which isn't bad enough, but then we sometimes have to endure whole repeated messages, once when the message is being told to the messenger, and again verbatim when the messenger relays the message. Odysseus, however, is far too crafty to simply repeat a message. And all that repeating in other instances may have been done to draw our attention to the times, like this, when a message is delivered differently by its messenger. Odysseus wisely omits Agamemnon's haughty language. There is nothing here about Achilles being ruled by Agamemnon or yielding place to him, for he is more royal. Remember that loot equals honor, so by making this generous offer, Agamemnon is dishonoring himself to transfer some of his honor to Achilles. And Agamemnon is doing this publicly before all the Greeks. He's demonstrating that Achilles is even more honored than himself, because only Achilles can save them. How will Achilles respond to Odysseus' speech and Agamemnon's generous offer? It should be tempting. Will Achilles say yes? Will he agree to save the Greeks? And Achilles, fleet of foot, answered and said unto him, Heaven sprung, son of Laertes, Odysseus of many wiles, in openness must I now declare unto you my saying, even as I am minded, and as the fulfillment thereof shall be, that ye may not sit before me and coax this way and that. For hateful to me, even as the gates of hell, is he that hideth one thing in his heart, and uttereth another. But I will speak what meseemeth best. Not me, I ween, nor the other Danaans shall Agamemnon son of Atreus persuade, seeing we were to have no thank for battling with the foemen ever without respite. He that abideth at home hath equal share with him that fighteth his best, and in like honor are held both the coward and the brave. Death cometh alike to the untoiling and to him that hath toiled long. Neither have I any profit, for that I endured tribulation of soul, ever staking my life in fight. Even as a hen bringeth her unfledged chickens each morsel as she winneth it, and with herself it goeth hard, even so I was wont to watch out many a sleepless night, and pass through many bloody days of battle, warring with folk for their women's sake. 12 cities of men have I laid waste from shipboard, and from land 11. I do you to wit. Throughout deep-soiled Troyland, out of all these took I many goodly treasures, and would bring and give them all to Agamemnon son of Atreus. And he, staying behind amid the fleet ships, would take them, and portion out some few, but keep the most. Now some he gave to be meeds of honor to the princes and the kings, and theirs are left untouched. Only for me, of all the Achaeans, took he my darling lady, and keepeth her. Let him sleep beside her, and take his joy. But why must the Argives make war upon the Trojans? Why hath Atrides gathered his host, and led them hither? Is it not for lovely-haired Helen's sake? Do then the sons of Atreus alone of mortal men love their wives? Surely, whatsoever man is good and sound of mind, loveth his own, and cherisheth her. Even as I too loved mine with all my heart, though but the captive of my spear. But now that he has taken my meed of honor from mine arms, and hath deceived me, let him not tempt me that know him full well, he shall not prevail. Nay, Odysseus, let him take counsel with thee, and all the princes, to ward from the ships the consuming fire. Verily, without mine aid, he wrought many things, and built a wall, and dug a fosse about it wide and deep, and set a palisade therein. Yet even so can he not stay murderous Hector's might. But so long as I was fighting amid the Achaeans, Hector had no mind to array his battle far from the wall, but scarce came unto the Scaean gates and to the oak tree. There once he awaited me alone, and scarce escaped my onset. But now, seeing I have no mind to fight with noble Hector, I will tomorrow do sacrifice to Zeus and all the gods, and store well my ships when I have launched them on the salt sea. Then shalt thou see, if thou wilt, and hast any care therefore, my ships sailing at break of day over Hellespont, the fishes' home, and my men right eager at the oar. And if the great shaker of the earth grant me good journey, on the 3rd day should I reach deep-soiled Phthia. There are my great possessions that I left when I came hither to my hurt, and yet more gold and ruddy bronze shall I bring from hence, and fair-girdled women, and grey iron, all at least that were mine by lot. Only my meed of honor hath he that given it me taken back in his despitefulness, even Lord Agamemnon son of Atreus. To him declare ye everything, even as I charge you, openly, that all the Achaeans likewise may have indignation, if haply he hopeth to beguile yet some other Danaan, for that he is ever clothed in shamelessness. Verily not in my face would he dare look, though he have the front of a dog. Neither will I devise counsel with him, nor any enterprise, for utterly he hath deceived me, and done wickedly, but never again shall he beguile me with fair speech. Let this suffice him. Let him be gone in peace. Zeus, the Lord of counsel, hath taken away his wits. Hateful to me are his gifts, and I hold him at a straw's worth. Not even if he gave me 10 times, yea, 20, all that now is his, and all that may come to him other whence, even all the revenue of Orchomenos or Egyptian Thebes, where the treasure houses are stored fullest, Thebes of the 100 gates, whence sally forth 200 warriors, through each with horses and chariots, nay, nor gifts in number as sand or dust. Not even so shall Agamemnon persuade my soul, till he has paid me back all the bitter despite. And the daughter of Agamemnon, son of Atreus, will I not wed, not were she the rival of golden Aphrodite for fairness, and for handiwork matched bright-eyed Athene. Not even then will I wed her. Let him choose him of the Achaeans another that is his peer, and more royal than I. For if the gods indeed preserve me, and I come unto my home, then will Peleus himself marry me a wife. Many Achaean maidens are there throughout Hellas and Phthia, daughters of princes that rule their cities. Whomsoever of these I wish, I will make my dear lady. Very often was my high soul moved to take me there a wedded wife, a helpmeet for me, and have joy of the possessions of the old man Peleus. For not of like worth with life hold I even all that wealth that men say was possessed of the well-peopled city of Ilios in days of peace gone by, before the sons of the Achaeans came. Neither all the treasure that the stone threshold of the archer Phoebus Apollo encompasseth in rocky Pytho. For kine and goodly flocks are to be had for the harrying, and tripods and chestnut horses for the purchasing. But to bring back men's life, neither harrying nor earning availeth, when once it has passed the barrier of the lips. For thus my goddess mother telleth me, Thetis the silver-footed, that twain fates are bearing me to the issue of death. If I abide here and besiege the Trojan city, then my returning home is taken from me, but my fame shall be imperishable. But if I go home to my dear native land, my high fame is taken from me, but my life shall endure a long while, neither shall the issue of death soon reach me. Moreover, I would counsel you all to set sail homeward, seeing ye shall never reach your goal of steep Ilios. Of a surety, far-seeing Zeus holdeth his hand over her, and her folk are of good courage. So go your way, and tell my answers to the princes of the Achaeans, even as is the office of elders, that they may devise in their hearts some other, better counsel, such as shall save them their ships, and the host of the Achaeans amid the hollow ships. Since this counsel availeth them naught, they that have now devised, by reason of my fierce wrath. But let Phoenix now abide with us, and lay him to rest, that he may follow with me on my ships, to our dear native land tomorrow, if he will, for I will not take him perforce. So spake he, and they all held their peace and were still, and marveled at his saying, for he denied them very vehemently. From the very start, it's clear Achilles is not going to be persuaded. But he's got a lot to say. He's been cooped up for a long time. He's had nothing but his anger, his stolen glory to think about, and he's had time to ruminate. Achilles says he'll be blunt because he doesn't want them all continuing to try to persuade him. And he doesn't like those who don't just speak their minds. This is likely a dig at Odysseus' crafty attempts at subtlety. Achilles won't yield to Agamemnon because, when he was fighting, he never felt appreciated. Achilles says that the whole point of this war was for the love of a son of Atreus for his wife. That's Menelaus, Achilles is talking about, but it's also a dig at Agamemnon and his feeling of loss when he had to give up Chryseis. Achilles says, of course, he felt similar love for Briseis, and that all men feel the same way for the women they love. Why should I fight to regain the wife of a man whose brother just stole mine? Under Agamemnon, Achilles says, the coward and the brave alike had equal honor, and he worked hard just to get the same rewards as those who didn't contribute nearly as much as he did. Achilles goes on to recount his exploits, how much he'd contributed to the war effort, only to be singled out for dishonor. Achilles acknowledges that, as High King, Agamemnon had the right to portion out the loot that was gathered by all. But Achilles regrets having put his all into this system, whereby his reputation wasn't just based on his own work, but rather on one man's assessment of his work, this one very flawed man, Agamemnon. We briefly touched on this question in Book 8, the question of whether a warrior's glory, his reputation, can be based on the assessment of just one man, or if it must be based on the assessment of the whole group. And in that case, it was referenced to Diomedes. And we came to the conclusion that no, reputation has to be a group assessment. So there is a disconnect between what Achilles knows his honor to be and what it is in the eyes of the one man who apportions the outward signs of honor. That one man, Agamemnon, who Achilles says stayed behind and wasn't even on the battlefield to assess whose prowess in battle was the most worthy. Achilles has lost faith in the whole system. He knows he's the best warrior, certainly better than Agamemnon, and Achilles cannot stand by to have others only see him through Agamemnon's eyes. Author James Aridi notes that by taking away something which had been given to Achilles, Agamemnon is treating Achilles worse than is considered at all proper for any citizen in their society to be treated. That means it was Agamemnon who alienated Achilles from their society, casting him out, treating him as a leper and a foreigner, rather than Achilles willingly leaving the Greeks. The hatred Achilles has for Agamemnon is so galling, it's undermined his whole perception of himself and his place in the world. If I'm the preeminent hero, son of a goddess, the greatest warrior of my generation, and quite possibly of all time, but I'm not respected, then what's the point? Achilles has come to the conclusion that fighting for loot or honor or whatever just isn't enough. Agamemnon will never cheat me again. His gifts are hateful to me. Not if he were offering 10 or 20 times the amount would I accept. Not if all the treasures were as countless as the grains of sand on the beach would I accept. All the treasure that Agamemnon could possibly offer me is never going to be enough. And it's in this line of argument that Achilles starts to veer away from the very simple stuff equals honor code we've seen in the Iliad, encompassed by the Greek word timi, where everyone is motivated by this simple arrangement. This is where we start to see the seeds of why the embassy just might fail in its mission, because Achilles is asking, is honor really the most valuable thing? If honor, what one gains through heroic battle, can simply be taken away, then is honor worth the risk? Achilles' thoughts can be seen clearly here. He's thinking about the life his elderly father has, that of a landowner in a peaceful place, reflecting on his glorious youthful exploits. And Achilles is dreaming of having a similar conclusion to his life, a peaceful retirement. He's had his glorious exploits. This war has been going on for 10 years now, and during that time, Achilles looted cities, defeated countless enemies. He's built the kind of reputation that would stand the test of time as one of the greatest heroes. He even says that he doesn't value treasure as much as life itself. This sounds reasonable to us, but it's a line of thinking that's moving away from the relentless pursuit of glory, which their warrior society depends on. The men of the embassy who came bearing this promise of stuff, great amounts of stuff, in order to convince Achilles to save them in the morning from certain doom, they must be getting nervous right about now. Is Achilles going to be swayed by the treasure we've come to promise him? What they and we have to keep in mind is that Achilles is unique. Among all the heroes among the Greeks in the Trojan War, Achilles is unique in that he's an emitheoi, son of a goddess, and given the unique right to choose his fate, which is something beyond even that of other children of goddesses. For instance, there's no such legend about Aeneas, son of Aphrodite, who is never referred to as being an emitheoi, but rather only the mortal son of an immortal mother. We can speculate on why exactly Achilles had the right to choose his fate. My own personal theory is that Achilles is the son that Zeus or Poseidon would have had with the goddess Thetis, had Zeus not taken steps to avoid letting Thetis wed another god, instead marrying her off to the mortal man Peleus. You see, there was a prophecy that Thetis would have a son who would be greater than his father. And this is certainly the case. Peleus was great, but Achilles is indisputably greater. But Achilles' father would have, and maybe should have, been Zeus. Zeus was very attracted to Thetis, but it was only through sidestepping his own fate that Zeus avoided bringing about his own downfall by fathering a fully divine Achilles. So my own theory, and this is my own personal theory, is that Achilles was given the right to choose whether to die young but gloriously in battle, or to live a long and happy but inglorious life in recompense for having been cheated of having a divine father. But that's, again, just my own theory. Since there's not really any dependable canon in ancient Greek mythology, we're all free to speculate and append our own inventions to this gloriously sprawling web of mythos. As a young man who didn't understand the real value of life, Achilles joined this war seeking glory. And unlike everyone else here, he knew for certain that he would achieve it. He would achieve glory, but at the cost of his life. Now that he's gotten a little older, this tiff with Agamemnon, which really does seem out of proportion, even in a loot equals honor-based society, has given Achilles a chance to rethink his priorities in life. And he's made a new choice. Yes, he's still mad at Agamemnon, but I feel that Agamemnon isn't really what Achilles is this angry about. Maybe he was at the start, but not now. His anger is about more than just Agamemnon. Achilles' rage, which is established in the opening line of the Iliad as its central theme. Sing, goddess, the wrath of Achilles, Peleus' son, the ruinous wrath that brought on the Achaeans woes innumerable and hurled down into Hades many strong souls of heroes. Achilles' wrath is really about his fate, our fate, the fate of all of us to live lives full of love and hope and potential, only to know all along that one day it will all be gone. We will all be gone. The Iliad is about all of us. This is why these lines and this story have resonated throughout all of human history. The Iliad is about the same topic as the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Bible itself, immortality, or the meaning of life in the face of our apparent physical mortality, as contrasted with the infinity we experience within ourselves. The unanswerable question of how and why it can be that we have hearts full of unending love and hope and fear, undying, unconditional, and yet we see our loved ones pass away into nothingness, finite after all. And we know the same finite end will be made of our infinite hearts as well. I've been reading Aldous Huxley's The Divine Within lately, and came across his way of phrasing this same concept, the contradiction between our infinite life within and our very finite life without. Huxley writes, "As many people have experienced, and all the teachers of the great religions have insisted should be the case, we can and ought to open ourselves up and become what in fact we have always been from the beginning, that is to say, omniscient, or anyhow, much more widely knowing than we normally think we are. The end of life, in all great religious traditions, is the realization that the finite manifests the infinite in its totality. This is, of course, a complete paradox when it is stated in words. Nevertheless, it is one of the facts of experience for many people, or for some people at least, and should be a fact of experience for all." Achilles is asking the questions that we also ask, questioning, what is it all for? He's the daughter of a goddess, guaranteed glory if he just reaches out for it. But is glory worth it once you're dead? That others will think well of you for all time, while you're in Hades with the other dismal shades, regardless of how glorious or meh your life was? Achilles is thinking about making a new choice now. He's willing to forego glory in order to keep living, and more importantly, to live the life he wants to live. To spend many future happy years in his beloved homeland of Phthia, that semi-mythical, semi-real place of peace and prosperity, where maybe looking for a few lost sheep is the biggest problem he'll face. To be with his loved ones. Maybe to look on the face of his aged father Peleus again. Achilles thought he'd never see his father again, having made the choice to join this war 10 years ago. But now he could be just 3 days away from home and his father and a peaceful life with Patroclus, now that he's learned to value his own life. Regardless of how Achilles came by this ability to choose his fate, he thought he'd made his decision already when he left Greece and joined this war on that day back home in Phthia, which Odysseus referenced in his speech. But Achilles is not dead yet, and as far as he knows, he didn't sign a contract or otherwise seal his fate, so he's reconsidering his decision. "I've tasted glory," he says, and it's got a bitter aftertaste. Maybe I'll go back to Greece with Patroclus and live that long and happy life. What we have to wonder as the audience who were witness to that scene atop Mount Olympus at the end of Book 8, when Zeus revealed to the other gods his plan to bring Achilles back into the war through the death of Patroclus, which I've referred to as Secret 2, is whether Achilles really has already sealed his fate. If his decision wasn't necessarily made when he joined this war as a young man, could his decision have been made with his wrathful prayer to Zeus for revenge upon Agamemnon? Could that have been the signing of the contract? Achilles' irrevocable selection of a short but glorious life over a long and inglorious one? Fate in ancient times was thought of as inescapable, and often with an ironic twist involved. So, continuing his railing against Agamemnon, Achilles sarcastically notes that Agamemnon has done a lot since Achilles has left the war. Agamemnon had that war built and got that ditch dug, but he can't seem to keep Hector at bay without my help. Tough luck. In conclusion, Achilles announces his plan. He says, in the morning, I'll make sacrifices to the gods, and I'll set sail with my men and all my stuff. And if Poseidon is willing, I'll be home in just 3 days. This war isn't my problem anymore. Achilles suggests to the other Greeks that they should all go home too. Taking Troy is impossible without me, and Zeus is obviously protecting the city. But leave old Phoenix here for the night, as he may want to go home with me in the morning. End rant. End. Epically long rant. With this momentous announcement, the men of the embassy are all silent and amazed. They can hardly believe what they just heard. Achilles' forceful and unexpected refusal of the offer, which was generous beyond measure. They have to be thinking now, this is bad. Like an ulcer eating away at his innards, Achilles' anger has been at work, and his state of mind is far worse than they ever expected. What the others hadn't considered is that treasure, any amount of treasure, won't be enough. From thinking they could offer some treasure and women and cities to Achilles to get him to return to battle, the Greeks now realize that Achilles, their only hope of salvation, is planning on completely abandoning them in the morning. The very morning they expect Hector will lead the Trojans through their crummy wooden defenses and burn their ships, Achilles will be sailing away while they are being burned and hacked to death on the shore. This is far, far worse than they expected. All that treasure, 7 cities to rule over, daughter of the High King to marry, flat denial, following Odysseus' speech, which is speech number 1 of 3. Keep that in mind as we move forward. Achilles' position following Odysseus' speech is flat denial, because we will look for evolution in Achilles' position following each speech. I'll also ask you to keep what I referred to as secrets 1 and 2 in mind. Secret 1 is that this doom facing the Greeks, the power Zeus has given the Trojans despite the Greeks' superior numbers, is due to Achilles' prayer to Zeus, and that Achilles likely knows this. This is probably why he's recommending to the other Greeks that they all abandon the war, although he's certainly not telling them that their doom is due to him. And secret 2, which only we and the gods know, is that Zeus will bring Achilles back into the action through the death of Patroclus. How did this generous offer fail? Furthermore, how did a generous offer communicated by the wily and witty Odysseus fail? Scholar Donna Wilson, in her paper Symbolic Violence in Iliad Book 9, suggests that what Agamemnon has offered to Achilles is not so much recompense for his wrong as it is ransom. And this caught me off guard because her use of the word ransom doesn't quite line up with my understanding of that word's definition. But she was very thorough. Here's the line of argument she puts forth. She analyzes several other less important examples in the Iliad of gift exchanges, and finding that they comprise 2 different categories, recompense and ransom, and that some comprise a combination of these 2. Agamemnon's offer to Achilles is at best a combination of the 2, that there is an element of recompense, yes, but there's also a strong element of ransom, the imposing of compulsion upon Achilles' behavior. Making Achilles his son-in-law keeps Agamemnon in a position of power over Achilles and dependent on his new father-in-law for his own status. If Achilles accepts Agamemnon's offer, he becomes subordinate to Agamemnon forever. Now, Nestor's original suggestion to Agamemnon was to offer both soothing gifts and soothing words. Odysseus tried to compensate for Agamemnon's failure to offer soothing words, but it wasn't enough. Maybe what Achilles needs is to hear from someone he's known since childhood. This is the opening for Phoenix to speak. And as James Arete points out, even in the vehemence of his response to Odysseus, Achilles demonstrates a deference to Phoenix as a respected father figure, which implies Achilles' need for his approval and sanction of his sense of alienation from society. Odysseus made some effort to appeal to Achilles' reverence for his own father. This was wise, and Odysseus was on the right track. But Achilles isn't there yet. He hasn't worked through all his feelings by this point. However, it will ultimately be Achilles' respect for his own father, as reflected in various father figures throughout the Iliad, which will bend Achilles' rage into an arc of emotional growth and the deeply satisfying conclusion to the Iliad. Next will be Phoenix's speech, the longest of the three speeches by far, consisting of three distinct portions. The first portion is largely biographical, where Phoenix recounts his own life and the mistakes he's made in an effort to convince Achilles to reconsider and rejoin the war by learning from his failures. The second and shortest portion of Phoenix's speech is what's called the Litae, and it's about prayers for supplication, for mercy, such as the men of the embassy are bringing to Achilles, and the risks one takes turning down those who come to you in need. The third portion is called the Parable of Meleagros, in which Phoenix recounts the story of a hero of a previous generation who was in a similar situation as Achilles, angered, refusing to come to the aid of those who needed him, and his regrets for decisions he made in anger. The Parable of Meleagros, like those in the Gospel, can be understood both at face value and at a deeper level. Phoenix's telling of the Parable of Meleagros will certainly have a lot of lessons for Achilles at face value, but like those of the Gospel, really comes to life when you know the background story, the original version, to compare the many and subtle ways in which the story we're being told differs from the original. Once Achilles has heard all three portions of Phoenix's speech, will his position evolve and move on from the flat denial he gave to Odysseus? Let's listen to Phoenix's speech now. But at the last spake to them the old knight Phoenix, bursting into tears, because he was sore afraid for the ships of the Achaeans. If indeed thou ponderest departure in thy heart, glorious Achilles, and hast no mind at all to save the fleet ships from consuming fire, because that wrath has entered into thy heart, how can I be left of thee, dear son, alone thereafter? To thee did the old knight Peleus send me the day he sent thee to Agamemnon forth from Phthia, a stripling, yet unskilled in equal war and in debate wherein men wax preeminent. Therefore sent he me to teach thee all these things, to be both a speaker of words and a doer of deeds. So would I not be left alone of thee, dear son, not even if God himself should take on him to strip my years from me, and make me fresh and young as in the day when first I left Hellas, the home of fair women, fleeing from strife against my father Amintor, son of Ormenos, for he was sore angered with me by reason of his lovely-haired concubine, whom he ever cherished, and wronged his wife my mother. So she besought me continually by my knees to go in first unto the concubine, that the old man might be hateful to her. I hearkened to her and did the deed, but my sire was ware thereof forthwith, and cursed me mightily, and called the dire Erinyes, to look that never should any dear son, sprung of my body, sit upon my knees. And the gods fulfilled his curse, even Zeus of the underworld, and dread Persephone. Then took I counsel to slay him with the keen sword, but some immortal stayed mine anger, bringing to my mind the people's voice, and all the reproaches of men, lest I should be called a father-slayer amid the Achaeans. Then would my soul no more be refrained at all within my breast, to tarry in the halls of mine angered father. Now my fellows and my kinsmen came about me with many prayers, and refrained me there within the halls, and slaughtered many goodly sheep and shambling kine with crooked horns, and many swine rich with fat were stretched to singe over the flames of Hephaestos, and wine from that old man's jars were drunken without stint. 9 nights long slept they all night round my body. They kept watch in turn, neither were the fires quenched, one beneath the colonnade of the fenced courtyard, and another in the porch before the chamber doors. But when the 10th dark night was come upon me, then burst I my cunningly fitted chamber doors, and issued forth, and overleapt the courtyard fence lightly, unmarked of watchmen and handmaidens. Then fled I far through Hellas of wide lawns, and came to deep-soiled Phthia, mother of flocks, even unto King Peleus, and he received me kindly, and cherished me as a father cherisheth his only son, his stripling heir of great possessions. And he made me rich, and gave much people to me, and I dwelt in the uttermost part of Phthia, and was king over the Dolopians. Yea, I reared thee to this greatness, thou godlike Achilles, with my heart's love. For with none other wouldst thou go unto the feast, neither take meat in the hall, till that I had set thee upon my knees, and stayed thee with the savory morsel cut first for thee, and put the wine cup to thy lips. Oft hast thou stained the doublet on my breast with sputtering of wine in thy sorry helplessness. Thus I suffered much with thee, and much I toiled, being mindful that the gods in no wise created any issue of my body, but I made thee my son, thou godlike Achilles, that thou mayest yet save me from grievous destruction. Therefore, Achilles, rule thy high spirit. Neither beseemeth it thee to have a ruthless heart. Nay, even the very gods can bend, and theirs withal is loftier majesty and honor and might. Their hearts by incense and reverent vows and drink offering and burnt offering men turn with prayer, so oft as any transgresseth and doth sin. Moreover, prayers of penitence are daughters of great Zeus, halting and wrinkled and of eyes askance, that have their task withal to go in the steps of sin. For sin is strong and fleet of foot, wherefore she far outrunneth all prayers, and goeth before them over all the earth, making men fall, and prayers follow behind to heal the harm. Now, whosoever reverenceth Zeus's daughters when they draw near, him they greatly bless, and hear his petitions. But when one denieth them, and stiffly refuseth, then depart they, and make prayer unto Zeus the son of Cronos, that sin may come upon such an one, that he may fall and pay the price. Nay, Achilles, look thou too that there attend upon the daughters of Zeus the reverence that bendeth the heart of all men that be right-minded. For if Atrides brought thee not gifts, and foretold thee not more hereafter, but were ever furiously wroth, then I were not that he should bid thee cast aside thine anger and save the Argives, even in their sore need of thee. But now he both offereth thee forthwith many gifts, and promiseth thee more hereafter, and hath sent heroes to beseech thee, the best men chosen throughout the host of the Achaeans, and that to thyself are dearest of the Argives. Dishonor not thou their petition, nor their journey hither, though erst it were no wrong that thou wast wroth. Even in like manner have we heard the fame of those heroes that were of old, as oft as furious anger came on any, they might be won by gifts and prevailed upon by speech. This tale I have in mind of old time, and not of yesterday, even as it was, and I will tell it among you, that all are as friends. The Coretes fought the staunch Aetolians about the city of Calydon, and slew one another, the Aetolians defending lovely Calydon, the Coretes eager to lay it waste in war. For Artemis of the Golden Throne had brought a plague upon them. In wrath that Oeneus offered her not the harvest first fruits on the fat of his garden land. For all the other gods had their feast of hecatombs, and only to the daughter of great Zeus offered he not, whether he forgat or marked it not, and therein sinned he sore in his heart. So the archer goddess was wroth, and sent against him a creature of heaven, a fierce wild boar, white-tusked, that wrought sore ill continually on Oeneus' garden land. Many a tall tree laid he low utterly, even root and apple blossom therewith. But him slew Meleagros, the son of Oeneus, having gathered together from many cities huntsmen and hounds. For not a few men could the boar be slain, so mighty was he, and many an one brought he to the grievous pyre. But the goddess made much turmoil over him and tumult concerning the boar's head and shaggy hide, between the Curetes and great-hearted Aetolians. Now, so long as Meleagros dear to Ares fought, so long it went ill with the Curetes, neither dared they face him without their city walls, for all they were very many. But when Meleagros grew full of wrath, such as swelleth the hearts of others likewise in their breasts, though they be wise of mind, then in anger of heart at his dear mother Althea he tarried beside his wedded wife, fair Cleopatra, daughter of Marpessa, fair-ankled daughter of Uenos, and of Ides, that was strongest of men that were then upon the earth. He it was that took the bow to face the king Phoebus Apollo, for sake of the fair-ankled damsel. And she was called Alcyone of her father, and lady mother by surname in their hall, because her mother in the plight of the plaintive halcyon bird wept when the far-darter Phoebus Apollo snatched her away. But by her side lay Meleagros, brooding on his grievous anger, being wroth by reason of his mother's curses, for she, grieved for her brethren's death, prayed instantly to the gods, and with her hands likewise beat instantly upon the fertile earth, calling on Hades and dread Persephone, while she knelt upon her knees and made her bosom wet with tears, to bring her son to death, and Irenaeus, that walketh in darkness, whose heart knoweth not ruth, heard her from Erebos. Now was the din of foemen about their gates quickly risen, and a noise of battering of towers, and the elders of the Aetolians sent the best of the gods' priests and besought him to come forth and save them, with a promise of a mighty gift, to wit, they bade him, where the plain of lovely Calydon was fattest, to choose him out a fair domain of 50 plough-gates, the half thereof vineland, and the half open to ploughland, to be cut from out the plain. And old knightly Oeneus prayed him instantly, and stood upon the threshold of his high-roofed chamber, and shook the mortice doors to beseech his son. Him to his sisters and his lady mother prayed instantly, but he denied them yet more. Instantly to his comrades prayed, that were nearest him and dearest of all men. Yet even so persuaded they not his heart within his breast, until his chamber was now hotly battered, and the Curetes were climbing upon the towers and firing the great city. Then did his fair-girdled wife pray Meleagros with lamentation, and told him all the woes that come on men whose city is taken. The warriors are slain, and the city is wasted of fire, and the children and the deep-girdled women are led captive of strangers. And his soul was stirred to hear the grievous tale, and he went his way and donned his glittering armor. So he saved the Aetolians from the evil day, obeying his own will. But they paid him not now the gifts many and gracious. Yet, nevertheless, he drave away destruction. But be not thine heart thus minded. Neither let heaven so guide thee, dear son, that were a hard thing, to save the ships already burning. Nay, come for the gifts. The Achaeans shall honor thee even as a god. But if without gifts thou enter into battle, the bane of men, thou wilt not be held in like honor, even though thou avert the fray. The first part of Phoenix's speech, a recounting of his own youthful exploits and the mistakes he made, which he hopes Achilles will avoid, appeals to the ancient Greek culture's emphasis on the value of the home and family. Phoenix hopes to cause Achilles to reflect on what his own family, and especially his elderly and much revered father Peleus, would think of his sitting out while his comrades are destroyed around him by their enemies. Phoenix recognizes Achilles' feeling of alienation from Greek society, and acknowledges he was sent here by Peleus to teach young Achilles all the things he needed to know to be a man. There is a fatherly feeling that Phoenix has for Achilles, who is the closest thing he has to a son of his own, and undoubtedly Achilles reciprocates this feeling. Being reminded of this feeling is what Achilles needs in order to feel connected to Phoenix, and justified in his own alienation from the others. Phoenix wisely establishes this foundation before going on to address the reasons why he wants Achilles to help them. Phoenix says he wouldn't allow himself to be left behind without Achilles, even if he could become young again. This leads Phoenix into a seemingly stream of consciousness reminiscence of his own story of why he left his homeland as a youth in exile. Of course, this isn't just an old man rambling, but a crafty retelling of a story that Achilles is surely familiar with, one told at a time and a place to suggest to Achilles that sometimes blame is shared between two parties, that not everything in life is right and wrong, virtuous victim and dastardly wrongdoer. Much of Phoenix's story plays on Achilles' strong respect for his father and for father figures in general. Phoenix and his father Amintor had a falling out when Phoenix was a young man, and it resulted in Phoenix leaving home forever and being cursed by his father, a curse which resulted in Phoenix not being able to have a son of his own. The actual event of the falling out was some really messy Bronze Age soap opera stuff. Basically, Amintor had a concubine, a young woman with whom he was totally enamored. As you can imagine, his wife, Phoenix's mother, was not at all happy about this. To rectify the situation, Phoenix's mother suggested to her son that he have sex with the concubine himself, so that she wouldn't want to be with an old man anymore. Phoenix obeyed his mother, and her plan worked, I guess. The concubine didn't want to be with Amintor anymore. Phoenix had saved his mother's honor. But this enraged Amintor, who cursed Phoenix to never be able to have a son of his own. Phoenix then wanted to kill his father, but he feared the reproaches he would face from society for committing patricide. He risked being pursued by the Furies and driven to insanity and death. So, Phoenix's next option was to go away in exile, but he was prevented from doing so, for a time, by his friends who kept him locked up for 9 days, until on the 10th night Phoenix saw his chance and escaped, never to return. As an exile, Peleus welcomed Phoenix and treated him as a son, offering him the safety and atonement his own father denied him. Now, in this story, Phoenix is reminding Achilles that what may seem to be a clear-cut case of a righteously angry young person is actually more complicated when viewed from the perspective of old age. In recounting the events leading up to his exile, Phoenix clearly takes on some blame. After all, he's the one who stole a woman from someone else, in fact his own father, unlike Achilles, who was stolen from. Do you hate me and revile me for being a wrongdoer, Achilles? No, of course you don't. The rights and wrongs of Phoenix's life story weren't clear-cut at all. Phoenix was defending his mother's honor, and he did succeed in that. But Phoenix did wrong to his own father, who had been doing wrong to his own wife. Amintor's rage against his own son was out of all proportion to the situation. In cursing his own son to never have a son of his own, Amintor was violating the duty he had to his bloodline by preventing himself and all his ancestors from allowing their line to ever continue. Phoenix did wrong, but he was wronged out of proportion to the harm that he did. Now, Achilles was wronged, and yet the harm that he's inflicting on the Greeks by sitting out and watching their destruction is similarly out of proportion to the harm that he suffered. And therefore Achilles is in violation of the duty he has to his society. Phoenix's life story is a convoluted mess, an impossibly tangled web of victims and wrongdoers, of fathers and sons loving and harming one another. The solution Phoenix is applying to Achilles is to recognize the moral complexity of life and to forgive. Despite the mistakes of his youth and the curse of his own father, Phoenix tells Achilles he got to be a kind of father to him, and his love for Achilles is something he'd never give up. This is the perspective of old age, to see one's life as a complete story rather than discrete episodes, and to appreciate even the difficult parts of the story because of the good that came from the bad. Phoenix accepts some blame for the falling out with his father, which suggests to Achilles that he should do the same. Yes, Agamemnon is largely in the wrong, but if there's no mutual attempt at reconciliation, then is healing even possible? We should also here remember the theme of separation, the voluntary separation which Achilles has initiated from the rest of the Greeks, and the potential for full alienation, a total disconnection from his society. This theme of separation with a threat of full alienation is one which Achilles himself has brought up, his threat to leave Troyland in the morning, and this theme is addressed even more thoroughly in the final portion of Phoenix's speech. Having completed our discussion of the biographical portion of Phoenix's speech, let's now review the second of the three parts of his speech, known as the Litae, because it's here that Phoenix makes reference to the Litae, daughters of Zeus, wrinkled and old, who represent prayers of repentance. This is a weird little portion, wedged in between the biographical and fatherly portion at the start, and the longer and more fleshed out parable of Meleagros he'll conclude with. Let's pause a moment here and dig into the Litae portion before moving on, because this little section is worth a close look. Depending on your religious background, you may have come across the word litany. I know I did, being raised as a Roman Catholic, where the word litany means a series of prayers. In secular language, we say litany to mean a long list of unpleasant things. In ancient Greek, litae were simply prayers, here personified as aged and slow-moving daughters of Zeus, moving much more slowly than the goddess Ate, the goddess of folly, who blinds men and leads them to their ruin. Author James Ariti, in his paper Homer, Litae and Ate, suggests that the members of this embassy are physical representations of the Litae themselves, those goddesses, halting and wrinkled and of eyes askance, that have their task withal to go in the steps of sin. Odysseus, Phoenix, and Aias represent the three Litae, and of course the wrath of Achilles represents Ate, sin, the goddess who blinds and leads to ruin. If this is the case, then for Achilles to deny the prayers of the embassy is to bring down upon himself the outcome that befalls all those who deny the Litae of Zeus. Then depart they, and make prayer unto Zeus the son of Cronos, that sin may come upon such an one, that he may fall and pay the price. No one in this room knows what that price will be, but we the audience know it, for Zeus revealed it to us in Book 8, its secret too, the death of Patroclus. Easing in to the Litae portion and its threatening message, Phoenix says that if Agamemnon hadn't made a great offer of gifts, he wouldn't now be pleading with Achilles to cast aside his wrath. But Agamemnon has offered you a lot now, Achilles, and more later. Furthermore, he sent the best men to come speak with you, honoring you with this prestigious embassy, rather than sending his heralds, as he would when sending a message to any lesser man. The implication of the Litae portion, this little argument of Phoenix's between his two larger ones, is that you are right now being supplicated, Achilles. You are being prayed to. Achilles, we the men of the embassy are your supplicants, and those who don't respond to the Litae are inevitably visited by Ate to their ruin. It's easy to miss this, but Phoenix very accurately predicts what will happen to Achilles. In the Litae, Phoenix makes what I feel is the most powerful argument, not only of his own speech, but of the embassy overall, where he asks Achilles to remember that even the gods can be placated. The ancient religion was largely about knowing which gods are angry with you at any given time and how to calm their anger. If even the anger of the gods can be extinguished, can't yours ever be calmed, Achilles? Are you mightier, haughtier than the gods themselves? Phoenix argues for Achilles to not make the visit of this embassy have been worthless. And while earlier your anger couldn't be questioned, maybe now after all this, after all you've been offered, that won't be the case anymore. Others may no longer support you or understand why you won't help us, now that Agamemnon has made such a generous offer. Phoenix now moves into the final portion of his speech, the parable of Meleagros, a hero of an earlier generation who withdrew from battle. There are a number of different versions of the Meleagros story out there, most of which don't have the same withdrawing from battle element that makes its inclusion here make sense. The scholar Jonathan Burgess, in an article titled The Tale of Meleager in the Iliad, discusses the possibility that the writer of the Iliad may have invented this version of Meleagros in order for Phoenix to have an example to draw from, versus the other possibility that what we have here in the Iliad is a pre-existing, pre-Homeric Meleagros epic, of which we now have only fragments, in addition to what Phoenix relates to us now. The other version of Meleagros' story contains a magical element, where the hero's life is bound up with that of a piece of wood burning in the family's hearth. In that more magical version, Meleagros' mother doused the wood and hid it to protect her son's life, but later burned it in revenge for Meleagros' killing her brothers, his uncles. Having one's life force tied up with some inanimate object is an interesting fairy tale device, but not at all relevant for our purposes here, and hence its exclusion in this Homeric version of the Meleagros story. At any rate, in the version of the Meleagros story relayed here in the Iliad by Phoenix, Meleagros was a hero whose father, the king of Caledon, had failed to offer sacrifice to Artemis. In her anger, Artemis released the beast, known as the Caledonian boar, on them. Once this beast had been defeated, along with the help of several heroic huntsmen and one very important huntswoman, Atalanta, to whom Meleagros awarded the honor of defeating the boar, Artemis sought further revenge by directing the neighboring Curetes tribe to attack Caledon. Among the Curetes were Meleagros' uncles, the brothers of his mother. In battle, Meleagros killed his uncles, and for this his mother cursed him. A simple curse, nothing about a magical piece of wood. Now, in anger with his mother, Meleagros refused to continue defending Caledon. Without his assistance, they were now losing the war, and it was becoming clear that Caledon would soon fall to the Curetes. Everyone was begging Meleagros to rejoin the war and save them. The people of Caledon offered Meleagros great treasures if he would only fight again before it's too late. But it was only when his own dear wife, Cleopatra, not that Cleopatra, this was a somewhat common name, meaning simply glory of the father. Anyway, when his wife Cleopatra came to him, she reminded Meleagros what happens to women when a city falls. And then he relented and strode forth to battle. Meleagros saved the city, but because so much of the city had been destroyed before he saved it, the people of Caledon denied him the promised treasures, and Meleagros ended up not only without any treasure, but having to apologize to the people for waiting so long to save them. These events added on in this version, in which Meleagros is not magically killed by his mother burning a piece of wood, provide an interesting and significant difference between the Homeric and non-Homeric versions of the Meleagros parable. And, like the parables of Jesus, it's likely here in the difference where the point of the story lies. Is Phoenix responding to Achilles having earlier said how he now values life over treasure? Is Phoenix building upon Achilles' rejection of worldly treasure and suggesting to Achilles that forgiveness is the answer? Author Judith Rosner, in her paper The Speech of Phoenix, Iliad 9.434 through 605, illustrates a number of parallels between Meleagros' story and that of Achilles, both events that have already occurred in Achilles' life and ones which are soon to come. Like Meleagros, Achilles has withdrawn from battle in anger. Both men have brooded over their hurts. Both withdrew to the shelter of a loved one, with Meleagros going to Cleopatra and Achilles to Patroclus. The withdrawal of both heroes led to setbacks for their allies. Coming to the present moment, Meleagros rejected his supplicants until it was too late to save them all, and too late to collect the treasure. Will Achilles do the same? If he does, will Achilles see the further negative outcomes that Meleagros faced? The fire, the death, the loss of glory and treasure. Phoenix concludes by saying, "Don't be like Meleagros. The ships can't be saved once they're on fire. Besides, if you act now, you can have all these gifts that have been offered to you. There's still time for you, Achilles, to have a different outcome than Meleagros did. Your story doesn't have to be a cautionary tale, an example of how not to be for future heroes. You can be a hero without reserve, a purely positive story for all time." And Achilles, fleet of foot, made answer and said to him, "Phoenix, my father, thou old man fosterling of Zeus, such honor need I in no wise, for I deem that I have been honored by the judgment of Zeus, which shall abide upon me amid my beaked ships, as long as breath tarrieth in my body, and my limbs are strong. Moreover, I will say this thing to thee, and lay it thou to thine heart. Trouble not my soul by weeping and lamentation, to do the pleasure of warrior Atrides. neither beseem it thee to cherish him, lest thou be hated of me that cherish thee. It were good that thou with me shouldst vex him that vexed me. Be thou king even as I, and share my sway by halves. But these shall bear my message. So tarry thou here, and lay thee to rest in a soft bed, and with break of day will we consider whether to depart unto our own, or to abide. He spake, and nodded his brow in silence unto Patroclus, to spread for Phoenix a thick couch, that the others might bethink them to depart from the hut with speed. Achilles gives a short response to Phoenix, which almost seems dismissive, but isn't. There are, in fact, a number of profound points Achilles makes here. Achilles says he has no need of the honor Agamemnon offers. Such Time need I in no wise, Achilles says. And furthermore, I deem I have received Time from Zeus. Time, honor, is what their warrior society is all about. Honor as measured by the physical things a warrior gains through battle. James Arete points to this statement of Achilles's as being his pronouncement of a new moral standard by which he now lives and measures himself. A morality not dependent on the gains of battle and the distribution of loot by a mortal king, but rather an internal assessment of the relationship one has directly with the divine. Does this sound familiar? It sounds to me much more like how we now assess morality ourselves in modern times. Despite having given the longest, most complex, and most compelling arguments of the embassy, Achilles' response to Phoenix essentially consists of only a handful of bullet points, but each one is significant. 1. I don't need any more honor. 2. Zeus honors me himself. 3. Phoenix, you really shouldn't be siding with Agamemnon. He hurt me, so you should be opposed to him and be on my side. 4. Stay with me overnight, Phoenix. Odysseus and Aias can carry my message back to Agamemnon. 5. And this is the most important one for the immediate movement of the Iliad story. In the morning, we will decide what to do. This last point marks an important evolution in Achilles' position. Remember, following Odysseus' speech, Achilles was leaving in the morning, packing it all up. Thanks to Phoenix, he's going to think about it until the morning. And that's an improvement. Despite the brevity of his response, we can see that Achilles isn't dismissing Phoenix's arguments. He's considering them. Achilles is thinking about staying. This had already been suggested when Achilles said, I deem that I have been honored by the judgment of Zeus, which shall abide upon me amid my beaked ships, as long as breath tarrieth in my body, and my limbs are strong. But we now start to foresee a future where Achilles doesn't leave the camp. For the men here who were sent on the mission to get Achilles back into the action to save them all, however, it's got to be hard to bite your tongue and not lash out at Achilles right now. We're all about to die, you ass, and you want to just think about it some more? Now, there is still one more speech left, that of Aias. Will Aias be able to convince Achilles to fight? But Achilles just isn't interested in any more speeches. He nods to Patroclus to make a bed for old Phoenix, and this is a hint to those of the embassy to be on their way. Aias hasn't spoken yet. If he's going to save the mission of the embassy, he's got to speak up right now. Then spake to them Aias, Telamon's godlike son, and said, Heaven-sprung son of Laertes, Odysseus of many wiles, let us go hence. For methinks the purpose of our charge will not by this journey be accomplished, and we must tell the news, though it be no wise good, with all speed unto the Danaans that now sit awaiting. But Achilles hath wrought his proud soul to fury within him, stubborn man that recketh naught of his comrade's love, wherein we worship him beyond all men amid the ships, unmerciful. Yet doth a man accept recompense of his brother's murderer, or for his dead son, and so the manslayer for a great price abideth in his own land, and the kinsman's heart is appeased, and his proud soul, when he hath taken the recompense. But for thee, the gods have put within thy breast a spirit implacable and evil, by reason of one single damsel, And now we offer thee 7 damsels, far best of all, and many other gifts besides. Entertain thou then a kindly spirit, and have respect unto thine home, because we are guests of thy roof, sent of the multitude of Danaans, and we would fain be nearest to thee and dearest beyond all other Achaeans, as many as there be. Aias does speak up, but instead of addressing Achilles with pre-planned arguments as the others had, and as I'm sure Aias had planned to do, with this premature dismissal of their embassy, Aias instead addresses Odysseus, saying that Achilles' heart has fully turned to anger. And Aias is angry. He goes on to say that even those who have lost a family member to murder will accept recompense from the murderer and move on. This is true. In ancient times, a murder settlement could be made by a payment to the family of the murder victim by the murderer himself or his family. Of course, this isn't an appeal to Achilles. It's bad-mouthing Achilles to someone else in front of him. This is a furious speech by Aias, not an effort to persuade or placate. It's venting. It's frustration. It's certainly not what he'd been preparing in his mind to say to Achilles. This is Aias feeling helpless now, that every possible appeal has been made and either rejected or just not even responded to. Aias is confounded and disgusted by Achilles' rejection of the moral code by which they all live. Achilles' rejection of seeking honor through the bestowing of prizes, and newfound insistence that his honor is something he will henceforth measure himself based on his internal, direct relationship with the divine. This is something entirely new. Consciously or not, Aias can sense this new moral code Achilles is now living by threatens to destabilize the very foundation of their society. Aias feels rejected personally by Achilles as well, and as part of the society which has shown Achilles love and honor through the only and proper way they had available to them, which was prizes won in battle. Aias is speaking for the whole society Achilles is rejecting by saying, yeah, buddy, the feeling is mutual. Aias calls Achilles unmerciful. But James Aridi points out that the Greek word translated here as unmerciful was one almost exclusively used when describing a weapon, as in an unmerciful spear taking the life of a man in battle. Toward the end of Aias' speech, he shifts and does finally address Achilles directly, saying that the gods have placed an evil spirit in you, and all over one girl when we're offering you 7. But it almost seems at the very end that Aias is also addressing himself as well as Achilles, reminding himself and Achilles of both their responsibilities in this all-important guest and host relationship of ancient times. Aias does want them all somehow to remain Achilles' friends despite this breach. Despite having gone way off script, Aias' angry, off-the-cuff speech did break new ground after all. It appealed to both the cultural value of friendship and the importance of the relationship between guest and host, something new for Achilles to respond to and hopefully draw him back toward them. This might actually work. As we saw when the embassy arrived, they were greeted by Achilles with meat and wine, and only after they ate were the guests asked about the purpose of their visit. So this demonstrates that Achilles does still recognize the traditional value of the guest-host relationship, despite his other movement away from Time, their value of battle-won prizes. Aias also broke new ground in that he accidentally reminded Achilles of his own wrath in the one way Aias could do so without being directly accusatory, which is that Aias showed anger himself, allowing Achilles to see his own anger reflected in his friend. Once Achilles gives his response to Aias, we'll see if there's been one final movement in the evolution of his position. Will Achilles remain? Will Achilles fight? But before we get to Achilles' response to Aias, let's note that these 3 particular heroes, Achilles, Odysseus, and Telamonian Aias, are here together having this contentious conversation. Long after this time, in events that will take place after the close of the Iliad, it will be Odysseus and Aias who will contend for the honor of inheriting Achilles' armor. Then it will be Aias who will be blinded by rage and unable to take the advice he now gives. Let's now hear Achilles' response to Aias and the last speech of the embassy. And Achilles, fleet of foot, made answer and said to him, Aias, sprung of Zeus, thou son of Telamon, prince of the folk, thou seemest to speak all this almost after mine own mind. But my heart swelleth with wrath, as oft I bethink me of those things, how Atrides entreated me arrogantly among the Argives, as though I were some worthless sojourner. But go ye and declare my message. I will not take thought of bloody war until that wise Priam's son, noble Hector, come to the Myrmidons' huts and ships, slaying the Argives, and smirch the ships with fire. But about mine hut and black ship I ween that Hector, though he be very eager for battle, shall be refrained. So said he. Achilles seems to resonate with Aias, with his anger, and with his appeal to friendship. Achilles says that he and Aias share the same thoughts, but that his heart fills with rage whenever he remembers the treatment he got from Agamemnon. This phrase, translated here as a worthless sojourner, is significant. In Greek, it's a word that means specifically a foreigner. With this, not only is Achilles making a callback to Aias' reminding them both of their relationship as host and guest, but Achilles is also demonstrating how Agamemnon didn't treat him as a fellow citizen in taking away his prize. Furthermore, that the other Greeks did nothing to stop this, implying that Achilles now feels like a foreigner among the Greeks. He feels fully alienated from them. He is a Greek citizen no longer. Achilles makes his announcement, the final evolution in his position, and his formal response to the embassy for them to report back to Agamemnon. I will not rejoin the Greeks in battle. I will refrain from war until it comes to my very ships, and I think Hector will think twice about doing battle with me. We've arrived at the final outcome of the embassy. Achilles' position after hearing from Aias is that he won't sail away, but he also won't rejoin the war. Achilles is just going to sit here in his huts like he's done all along. It's no progress at all. Achilles has just been sitting here since book 1, and he'll continue sitting here doing nothing. When the embassy reports back, the other Greeks aren't going to understand that this actually was progress. From Achilles' first stated position in book 9, when he was definitely going to sail away in the morning with Patroclus and the Myrmidons, Achilles is back to where he was, sitting out the war, but doing his sitting right here in the war camp. Over the years, much has been made of the fact that Achilles rejects Agamemnon's offer of gifts, refuses reconciliation, and refuses to return to the war. Is Achilles not really the deep spiritual man surrounded by materialistic treasure seekers that we want him to be? What is the point of book 9, since it doesn't seem to advance the plot of the Iliad? What to make of the fact that, later on in the Iliad, Achilles will mention to Patroclus that Agamemnon hasn't offered recompense? Was book 9 shoehorned in later on, only to make it seem like Achilles and the Iliad overall is about more than guys getting angry about how loot is divided? Numerous suggestions have been made. Author Robert Rabel, in his paper Sophocles' Philoctetes and the Interpretation of Iliad 9, suggests that the members of the embassy made appeals to Achilles using every relevant aspect of ancient Greek culture except one, the one which was successfully used by Heracles in Sophocles' play Philoctetes. In that play, the title character was being presented with a similar request to return to battle. And in that case, Heracles appealed to his own life as an example of a positive heroic story, which was, in that story, successful in inspiring Philoctetes to rejoin and participate. It may well be the case that this embassy could have been successful if any of them had appealed to a positive heroic story. But then again, in any encounter between Heracles and anyone else, Heracles could hold himself up to be a model for further improvement. He was Heracles, after all, destined to be made divine for his heroism. None of the Iliad's embassy members, as outstanding as at least Odysseus and Aias were as warriors, could have held themselves up to Achilles as a model for improvement. Odysseus's subtle and cunning editing of Agamemnon's message to Achilles wasn't enough. In all likelihood, Achilles knew Odysseus well enough to suspect he was amending Agamemnon's words. And he knew Agamemnon well enough to suspect his real message was not kindly or soothing at all. I believe the embassy of Book 9 was doomed to fail from the start. But does that mean there was no point to it? And does it mean that Achilles really is just a materialistic treasure seeker? Certainly not. We have established in Book 9 that the character flaws of our primary protagonist, Achilles, and those of our primary antagonist, Agamemnon, are truly irreconcilable. If Agamemnon had made this offer sooner, then the embassy might have succeeded. But in his brooding since Book 1, Achilles has moved on to a morality that is more complex than their warrior honor culture could comprehend. Agamemnon's offer has simply come too late. This morally complex Achilles we've met in Book 9 is the groundwork for an Achilles whom we will see emerge in the latter half of the Iliad. That Achilles is someone who is emotionally complex, yes, a man with deep passions, as we've already seen, but one struggling to express the love in his heart while constrained by the culture of his times. His own lofty goal is to always be the best, the promachos in battle, which is his destiny as an emetheoi. But the Achilles who is the preeminent warrior conflicts with the Achilles who loves so strongly and wants nothing more than to spend his days with Patroclus, growing old with his dearest friend. Agamemnon is not an antagonist, not a villain per se, but merely the knife that divides these two sides of Achilles. The Achilles we see emerge by Book 24 will be a whole man, harmed but whole, who will face and accept his fate. As a final note regarding the apparent failure of the embassy and its lack of an impact on the plot of the Iliad, let's remind ourselves yet again of Secret 2, that secret which Zeus revealed to the other gods and to us the audience at the end of Book 8, his plan to draw Achilles back into the war with the death of Patroclus. If it weren't for the embassy, Achilles would have sailed home in the morning. Through their successive speeches and softening of Achilles' position, the embassy of Odysseus, Phoenix, and Aias changed Achilles' mind, and now he and Patroclus will remain here in Troyland. The embassy did succeed, but not in the way they sought. Instead, the embassy succeeded, unwittingly, in trapping Achilles within his tragic fate. Achilles may have started off life with two possible fates, but he made his choice, and he's now being inexorably drawn to one fate, a glorious yet short life. But oh, how glorious it will be. And they took each man a two-handled cup, and made libation, and went back along the line of ships, and Odysseus led the way. And Patroclus bade his fellows and handmaidens spread with all speed a thick couch for Phoenix. And they obeyed and spread a couch as he ordained, fleeces and rugs and fine flock of linen. Then the old man laid him down and tarried for bright dawn. And Achilles slept in the corner of the mortised hut, and by his side lay a woman that he brought from Lesbos, even Phorbas' daughter, fair-cheeked Diomede. And on the other side Patroclus lay, and by his side likewise fair-girdled Iphis, whom noble Achilles gave him at the taking of steep Scyros, the city of Aeneas. Now, when those were come unto Atreides' hut, the sons of the Achaeans stood up on this side and on that, and pledged them in cups of gold, and questioned them. And Agamemnon, king of men, asked them first, Come now, tell me, Odysseus, full of praise, thou great glory of the Achaeans, will he save the ships from consuming fire? Or said he nay, and hath wrath yet hold of his proud spirit? And steadfast, goodly Odysseus answered him, Most noble son of Atreus, Agamemnon, king of men, He yonder hath no mind to quench his wrath, but is yet more filled of fury, and spurneth thee and thy gifts. He biddeth thee take counsel for thyself amid the Argives, how to save the ships and folk of the Achaeans. And for himself he threateneth that at break of day he will launch upon the sea his trim well-benched ships. Moreover, he said that he would counsel all to sail for home, because ye now shall never reach your goal of steep Ilios. Surely far-seeing Zeus holdeth his hand over her, and her folk are of good courage. Even so said he, and here are also these to tell the tale that were my companions, Aias and the two heralds, both men discreet. But the old man Phoenix laid him there to rest, even as Achilles bade him, that he may follow him on his ships to his dear native land tomorrow, if he will, for he will not take him perforce. So said he, and they all held their peace and were still, marveling at his sayings, leave Achilles, for he harangued, very Phoenix behind. Agamemnon sees them returning and is eager for good news, as well he might be, knowing how very much was offered to Achilles, and how very much rides on his decision. But Agamemnon's hope is quickly dashed. Along with Agamemnon, the other Greek leaders are there, and Odysseus gives them all the bad news. Odysseus, however, gives an edited version of Achilles' message to Agamemnon, just as he gave Achilles an edited version of Agamemnon's message. Odysseus tells Agamemnon that Achilles is threatened to leave in the morning. That's true. Technically, Achilles did say that, but it wasn't the last thing he said, which was that he would not leave, but that he would also not fight. Odysseus is angry at Agamemnon for putting them all in this predicament, and he's giving the High King the worst possible report he can without outright lying. And this is also a way to manage expectations, so the others understand that the seeming no progress the embassy made actually was progress. Despite Odysseus' expectations management, it's still a bitter pill for the other Greek leaders to swallow. Hopes had been high that they would return with the great Achilles to save them from the surrounding Trojans. As you can imagine, the leaders are all upset learning that Achilles has rejected Agamemnon's offer. Long were the sons of the Achaeans voiceless for grief, but at last Diomedes of the loud war cry spake among them. Most noble son of Atreus, Agamemnon, king of men, would thou hadst never besought Peleus' glorious son with offer of gifts innumerable, proud as he at any time, but now hast thou yet more far encouraged him in his haughtiness. Howbeit, we will let him bide, whether he go or tarry. Hereafter he shall fight, whenever his heart within him biddeth and God arouseth him. Come now, even as I shall say, let us all obey. Go ye now to rest, full to your heart's desire of meat and wine, wherein courage is and strength. But when fair rosy-fingered dawn appeareth, array thou with all speed before the ships thy folk and horsemen, and urge them on, and fight thyself amid the foremost. So said he, and all the princes gave assent, applauding the saying of Diomedes, tamer of horses. And then they made libation, and went every man to his hut. Diomedes says he wishes Agamemnon hadn't made this offer to Achilles, that by making this enormous offer, it's just given proud Achilles a chance to become even more proud by rejecting it. But Diomedes wraps up their situation from a practical standpoint. Achilles will either fight or he won't. Regardless of what Achilles decides, they know they all must fight in the morning. And so Diomedes recommends that everyone eat and then get some rest. Obeying Diomedes' recommendation, the Greeks now all try to get some rest. But with the Trojans surrounding the camp, threatening to batter down the walls and burn their ships in the morning, I wouldn't be able to sleep. And as it turns out, neither will the Greeks. That's it for Book 9. A casual reader might think, wow, they tried to get Achilles back into the fight, he refused. That's it. That's all that happened. But as we discovered, there was so much more going on just under the surface. And a return to the status quo of Achilles being present but non-participating was really a big step forward, both from his initial plan of sailing away in the morning and toward his and Patroclus' fate, which will be explored as the Iliad moves towards its conclusion. Next time, Book 10, one of my absolute favorites. You like sneaking, spying, murder, theft? Book 10 has it all. A fun diversion in the middle of this darkest night as the sleepless Greeks try one last desperate attempt to save themselves from certain doom in the morning. I can't wait to get into it. Until next time, this has been Daniel with Your Mythology Book Club. Thanks for listening.